Manager, Mr. Sebopetsa, the Agricultural Development and Support Services, DDG, Mr. Jacobs, as well as the Director of Business Planning and Strategy, Dr. Trotsky, I beg your pardon, from the Department of Agriculture. Then I'd also like to welcome the MEC and HOD of Social Development in the Western Cape, as well as the Social Security Agency in the Western Cape. We welcome you all. I have received one apology from Honourable America, and Honourable Mackenzie will be standing in for him. Could I just ask if there are any other apologies at this stage?
Thank you, Chairperson. I haven't received any other apologies.
Thank you very much, Ms. Adams. All right, before we get going, I'd like to just indicate the rules of engagement for virtual meetings. All members have been muted at the beginning of the meeting to avoid any background noises. Members, if you would like my attention, or if you'd like to raise a point of order, please use the chat function to indicate so. The chat function should only be used for the purpose of raising points of order, and it should be kept clear of any chat, as it were. One wouldn't hold conversations during a meeting, and that would be the equivalent thereof. Okay, right. Then if I could please ask that all video and audio be switched off, which will assist us in improving the quality of the connection. However, if a member, a minister, head of department or official is speaking, they may put on their mic and video. I then ask that participants switch off their mics once they have finished speaking. We will proceed as follows for this afternoon's meeting. We are going to have briefings from all departments, starting with the Department of Agriculture, followed by the Western Cape Social Development Department, and then by Sassa Western Cape. Thereafter, we will then have a Q&A session with members' inputs and questions. As this is our first for virtual meetings, we will have some teething issues. And in our last meeting was the first time that we had tried to run such a large standing committee meeting. And so this afternoon, I'd like to run the question session slightly differently. And try and find a better way to ensure that you all have good opportunities to participate. So in the Q&A session, each party will be afforded an opportunity of 2 or 3 minutes per round. I'll recognize each party in order of electoral support, and then each party can determine amongst themselves who will be asking the questions, or if they want to divide it amongst the members, if there's more than one member represented. And use your 2 or 3 minutes per round. We'll then have responses, and then a second round will proceed in the same manner, where each party will be recognized and each party will determine for itself which questions will be asked, whether those be follow-ups or new questions, etc. Then if with that as the rules of engagement out the way, we'd like to welcome the Minister of Agriculture, Dr. Meyer. If we could hand over to you, please.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the members of the committee dealing with the COVID-19 oversight. Thank you very much. I'll be very brief and hand over to my head of the department. We have done a report on the impact of COVID-19 on agriculture and food in the Western Cape. It is still a working document, and we would certainly appreciate any further input from this committee in updating this particular document, because we don't believe that we have the sole wisdom of the magnitude, the scale, and the depth of this particular problem, and therefore we appreciate the appearance before this committee. I would very much like now to hand over immediately to my head of the department, Dr. Sebopetsa, who will then lead this presentation, and I will conclude and deal with most of these answers at the end. Thank you, Chair.
Minister, thank you very much. Chairperson and members, good afternoon. I hope you can all hear me. Chairperson.
Yes, sir, we can hear you loud and clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank the committee again for inviting us. We are indeed in tough times as a nation. We've completed a report that looks at the impact of COVID on food security in the province. But Chair and members should also know that the agricultural food value chain had been declared essential in terms of the regulations, and therefore farmers had been going on doing a good work to ensure that all of us are food secure in the province. And I want to immediately hand over to my colleague, the Director for Business Planning and Strategy, Dr. Derek Trotsky, who will take you through the presentation, about 25 minutes or so, Chair, and then we will be open for your questions and whatever comments you have. Thank you very much.
Chairperson, thank you very much. I've shared the presentation on screen. I'm not quite sure whether you can see it.
Yes, we can see it. If you'd want to put it in presentation, there we go. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Before you proceed, let me just check. Is there anybody that is unable to see the presentation?
Okay.
Could you say your name, please?
Wendy, Member Philander. I can see the presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. All right. It seems that everyone is able to see the presentation. Please proceed.
Okay. Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you very much for this opportunity. So what I'm going to address is basically first give a few realities of South African food system, then some of the disruptors we are currently observing, look at the impact on the system, our intervention matrix, and then also look at the protection of farm workers and personal protection equipment. So to go ahead, I think it's important that we start off with the question, what is household food security? And if we, at that level, we should talk about adequate availability of the product, the accessibility of it in terms of physical, social, and economic, and we must accept that in certain instances there are certain social norms and standards. And we must also accept that poor people can also be allergic to nuts and fish and things like that. So we also need to keep that in mind. The utilization of the product and then the stability of the food supply. So those are the 4 elements of household food security. And I just want to also indicate that I'm not so much going to talk about the economic impact of COVID-19. There's a separate report that has been developed by my colleague Lou Pinar, and that is part of the submission to the by the economic cluster to Cabinet. So I think the first thing that we must realize is that South Africa is a surplus producer of food, and our main exports is citrus fruit, wine, table grapes, deciduous fruit, maize and beef, etc. And our main imports is rice, poultry and wheat. And that has got certain implications, and I'm going to come back to that at a later stage. In terms of the Western Cape, we are literally living in a land of milk and honey. We produce 171 kilogram per person per year of wheat. That is more or less equal to 1 bread per person per day. We produce 118 kilograms of apples per person per year. Pears 65 kilograms, grapes 259, milk 127 liters of milk per person per year. So we are at a provincial level, in addition to South Africa being a surplus producer of food, normally in the Western Cape, we are even going beyond that. And at the global level, we are very fortunate that at this stage, we are actually the food price index, and this is deflated. In other words, the effect of inflation is taken out of this figure. And this is being provided by the FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. At this stage, global food prices is more or less at the same level than it was in the 1960s and 1970s. Everybody will still remember that in 2008 and 2011, there were the food price spikes. Fortunately, at a global level, there was basically about a decade of surplus production of food. So the stocks are high at a very good level. If we turn to South Africa, we must realize that our food value chain is extremely complex. On the one side, on the producer side, there's a very important international interface in this whole system on the production side in terms of certain imports that we require, but also on the export side. It's important that we also recognize that in the Western Cape, about 60% of the value of our products gets exported. On the consumer side, at the domestic level, roughly 70% of fresh produce are sold via the formal sector, via supermarkets and things like that, which gives us a fairly much a first world characteristic on that side. However, we cannot ignore the informal trade. That means that 30% more or less of all products is in the informal trade, and the informal trade is most prominent in those areas which are also most vulnerable. So we cannot talk about our food value chain if we don't recognize the complexity of it, and also the important role of informal trade. And to that extent, I just want to show you, this is a chain, the shops of one supermarket chain. And I could have used any of the other supermarkets also. But it's clear that there's an inverse correlation between the number of supermarkets and the population in particular areas. So again, although our supermarkets are well represented in your high density areas, it's not as well represented as in the more affluent areas, and that again illustrates the point of the importance of the informal trade. What we must also recognize is that the poor people in our society are the most vulnerable. If we look at the blue bars indicate per household the amount spent on food per category of the spending group. The green line indicates the percentage of income. So what we find is that in the poorer component, group 1, roughly 40% of household income is spent on food. So these are the people that's also most vulnerable in terms of how any change in income, employment, increase in the price of food will have an inverse impact on exactly this poorest part of our society. We must also recognize that there's a change in what people eat. In the low-income groups, chicken, maize meal, brown bread, and rice are some of the most important. And in the affluent households, beef, chicken, milk, mutton, lamb, high sugar food are the typical products that's being consumed. So that also has got an impact on what is provided and sold at what part of society or in what parts of shops. Then we must always recognize that in agriculture, we are working with biological products. What this means is that we cannot have the same processes that you would get in things like that. You can't have the same tolerances. Manufacture gearboxes for cars. You can have a tolerance on the gearbox for or something like that. In agriculture, it's a biological product, so no two apples are going to look the same. In any production, on any tree, you will have first grade, second grade, third grade apples. And where we produce what is also dependent on the climate and the land capability. So fortunately, in the Western Cape, we've got a winter rainfall region with a lot of deciduous fruit and things like that, but we cannot produce maize down in the Western Cape. We can produced in the northern parts of the. Then we must finally, on this part of the slide of the presentation, is that we must remember that there are certain concentrations of people. Our people are concentrated in particular areas, and the challenge is quite often to get the food from where the food is produced to where the people are. So that is some of the realities of food production and the food system in South Africa and in the Western Cape. I want to move to some of the disruptors that we have identified. Some of those disruptors we already see appearing, and some of this, fortunately, we haven't seen developing. So,
Mr. Trotsky, we
yes, certainly. Sorry. May I continue?
Yes, I was just wondering if perhaps if you could turn off your camera because we lose you from time to time.
Okay, I will do. I've turned it off. I hope that will improve the connection. Okay, so in terms of disruptors, I've got 4 slides on this, and I'll try to go quickly through this. The first one is that unfortunately we've got some bottlenecks and closure of some of our ports. Originally, the capacity was reduced to 30% of normal. It has since been resolved to a certain extent, but we had a situation that ships, it took up to 25 days for one ship to get from Cape Town, Port Elizabeth, Durban, and on to the rest of the world. So we have had a number of ships that passed by our ports, so we couldn't upload our products, or they just stopped in harbour and just offloaded, but didn't wait for products to be uploaded. So that had a certain impact on the exports of our products. The disruption of air traffic has removed some of the cargo space for high-value products, and it also increased from $1.80 per kilogram to $3 per kilogram over the past few weeks. That evidently will have an impact on what we're experiencing. Importing countries start prioritizing goods. Certain products just end up on the harbour, not being moved. Farm inefficiencies abroad. We've seen, particularly in Europe and North America, who are dependent on migrant labor from Eastern Europe in the case of Europe, or from Mexico in North America, that those labor can't move. And so that's got an impact on their planting and harvesting seasons. And we will have to see how that plays out. We may have seen disruptions in our domestic value chains. We haven't seen that very much, so we are fortunate with that. My computer seems to have frozen at this stage. So there you go. So we may see social unrest, which may have an impact. There can be a situation of on-farm outbreak of COVID-19. Fortunately, farms are natural isolation units, so we haven't seen that much. One of the things that I'm going to come back later is the inability to import key inputs into the agricultural sector. Things like machinery and machine parts, agricultural chemicals, certain fertilizers, packing material, etc. And this may have a major impact over the medium to longer term, not necessarily so much on current food, but over the next for the next harvest, it may be a problem. Lockdown of diversion of production capacity to other products may be an issue, and inefficiencies in the input supply chains. In other words, where farmers can't get day-old chicks or broilers and things like that, may have an input. Further, there is the lockdown led to job losses. How will those lost jobs, people lose the ability to purchase food? What will be the impact of that? The exchange rate has weakened quite substantially over the past 3-4 weeks. Our exporters get better products, but the inputs and particularly the imported food will become more expensive. Things like rice, etc., that we import. The slowdown in our economy, it ranges between calculations between 8 and 12%. How long is that going to last? What will be the impact of that on people's ability to buy food? The slowdown in the global economy, more so. And on the export side, for instance, about 90% of our Granny Smith apples gets exported to African countries. With a drop in the oil price and countries like Angola and Nigeria, their economies are taking a knock. To what extent will they be able to still purchase our Granny Smith apples? That's going to have an impact. Changes in consumer patterns, we see particularly abroad, people move more to fresh fruit and vegetables. Sorry, that was one too quick. We are also worried about government failure. If key units in government contract COVID-19, for instance, if our veterinary services can't certify animal products anymore, it will have a major impact on the availability of food. Our lockdown, how long it will stay and how we will emerge from that is another question. The President last night indicated certain processes to be followed, and we will have to see how that will impact on production. Inconsistent application of lockdown regulations, that is a problem between provinces, but it may also be counterproductive in certain areas. And then how the lockdown will develop abroad. So how it will impact on the system, we have developed a matrix where we said there are a number of these disruptors and they will have impact, for instance, on the on shortage of food on the domestic market over the short term and the long term, on vulnerable communities, etc. And I'll briefly go through those now. Short term, domestic supply of food is to a large extent still intact, and what we are seeing in our shops, that the empty shelves was more the result of panic buying than anything else. That's in the commercial sector. The exception is in the high value imported products, where it is sometimes where there are certain brands that's not available, but you can use a different brand within the same product category. In terms of the long-term shortage of goods on the domestic market, the exchange rate will definitely have an impact on the price of imported products. And that would be certain products that we import, like, for instance, rice, certain types of wheat. Of a bigger concern is the availability of essential farming inputs. And what we are seeing is that essential farming inputs, the cost of those are increasing. And we are worried that some of the products are actually not entering South Africa. So that may have an impact, not on the current harvest, but 6 months, a year from now, we may see an impact on next season's harvest. In the vulnerable communities, it is quite often not, it is not that there is not sufficient food. It is that people cannot access that food. In terms of people don't have the availability to pay for the food. And for that reason, it is the food parcel process is very important. But we are of the opinion that it will be very difficult and dangerous to have a sufficient only government response. And we must see how we can link the food parcels with a food voucher or a coupon system to help people to get access to the food which is already being distributed through the current value chain in the private sector. In terms of wasting of fresh produce, there are at this stage not to be a lot of wastage taking place. What we see is there is some problems, and because people can't sell food via fast food outlets or restaurants, etc., in certain instances, some farmers are sitting with certain products that it's difficult to move. and new markets have to be developed for those. So this is a part of the problem. Loss of market share abroad, we are very concerned about our wine and cut flowers, which are very much at risk. The wine industry has now couldn't export for about 6 weeks. Well, by the 1st of May, it will be 6 weeks that they could not really export. And we are worried that in our main markets, still selling wine, that our supply of wine in those markets will run out. It will be Argentinian wine or Chilean wine will replace our wine, and it will be very difficult to get that market share back. I talked about the shortage of farming inputs that may have a problem, and another problem will be failing farms. At this stage, the problem is not so much technical failure. In other words, that people can't continue farming for some other reason, but the financial inputs. The financial ruin of some farm is for us of a much bigger concern, because we must recognize that there is a change in price. As I indicated, some markets have closed. There are a number of inefficiencies that is now built into the system. For instance, social distancing, where farmers could bring their workers to farm on trucks. They have 2 or 3 different trucks or buses to get people there. That's additional costs. And then the purchasing of personal protecting equipment and things like that also come at a cost. So that is of worry to us. The current status, I just a few slides. This is a slide of our maize crop. The green line is the white maize, which is used for food purposes. And I didn't include the whole 3 decades of data that I've got. But this is the second biggest crop in the past 3 decades that we will have this year. In the case of yellow maize, that's the red line, it's the 3rd biggest crop in the past 3 decades. So from staples, in South Africa, we are good. This is the price of potatoes at the Epping market. The top left is the past 5 years. So on the bottom left side, I've added that up to the average for the 5 years, and we see that currently the volume sold is closely related to what is happening. Tomatoes, onions, the same. It varies around the long-term average. In terms of our deciduous fruit harvest, apples, we've got a very good crop. Pears is not as good as 2 years ago, but that may still be the impact of the drought. That the trees did not have the opportunity to recuperate yet from the impact of the drought. Peaches and nectarines also up from last year. Plums more or less the same as last year. This then brings us to the status of those various impacts. And in terms of most of the elements, it's green, and we only need to monitor the availability of food. In short term, we probably need to look at remote rural communities, and we are a little bit worried about what is happening there. Our biggest concern at this stage is the food security in vulnerable communities. And as I indicated, it's not that there is not sufficient food in the province. The problem is that the challenge of that food reaching the people, either through the informal market, which has been disrupted to a large extent, but also people don't have the means to pay for the food that is available in the shops. Wasting of fresh produce is not that big an issue. Loss of market share is important for the wine industry, and fortunately, hopefully they will be able to export after the 1st of May. Of bigger concern is our shortage of farming inputs, and not immediate, but over the medium to longer term. And then the monitoring of financial and technical health of farms. I've got about 2 minutes left, so I'm quickly going to just address the personal protection equipment. We have procured protective face masks for 100,000 agri workers. It's 1,000 liters of hand sanitizers, and we are on a weekly basis. We are engaging with our clients on this regard. Those 100,000 face masks were purchased by the Department of Agriculture, and also develop instructions on how to use the mask, because we were informed that in addition it may be very dangerous if the face masks are not used correctly. This was how it was distributed. 68,000 of these masks were to commercial farmers, and about 32,000 went to smallholder farmers. And some of these masks were dropped off at cooperatives where farmers signed and collected these masks. These are examples of the resources that we shared with the masks, so that on how to use it safely and things like that. We've got a testimonial here of one of the agri workers, but we are running out of time, so I'm not going to play the testimonial, but it is available at a later stage. Minister Meyer visited the FINA as part of this, and we are also partnering with Distel in terms of the distribution of alcohol sanitizers and things like that. So, Chairperson, thank you very much for this opportunity to make this presentation. I presume there will be questions, and I'm not sure whether the questions I will have to address it, or whether the Minister or my HOD will address it. Thank you very much.
Chair.
Thank you very much, Dr. Trotsky. I know we had said that we were going to leave the questions until after all the presentations. However, members, would you object if we were to take questions and answers for the Department of Agriculture? We will then excuse them before we move to Social Development and Sassa. Any objections?
Chairperson.
No.
Chairperson.
No objections? Who's speaking?
It's Mohale. I wanted to ask if I could give my MEC just to wrap up in terms of the presentation, please, before your questions.
Yes. Apologies. Please proceed. Thank you.
I want to hand over to my Minister Ivan Meyer.
Thank you, Mohale, and thank you to the Chair. I think what we are currently seeing is a massive role for agriculture in the food security value chain. We are currently monitoring this through scientific evidence. We have looked at the BFAP report. We are also monitoring the trends from the Fruit Export Producers Forum in terms of the exports. So these are things that we also scientifically try to monitor. And as things develop, we will certainly be very happy to come back to the committee to provide further input. I think what is also important for this committee to note is that we have decided to keep the Western Cape Veterinary Export Certification Office in Milnerton open. People can apply online, and they have to come back 24 hours later the next day while maintaining all the normal social distancing and health standards to collect the export certificate. We have decided to do this because it is very important that that office alone generate annually 5 billion rand in agricultural value production for export. So it is very important that we keep this open. But as Dr. Trotsky indicated, we are still having some challenges in terms of the wine industry. But we have written a letter to Minister Toko Dudisa. The Premier has also written a letter to the President. And in terms of the issue that Dr. Trotsky raised about the flowers industry, I have also written a letter to the National Minister in this particular regard, and Mohale is also taking up this particular matters. So, Chair, I would like to hand over to you, but I would like to say that these are emerging things, and certainly if there are any issues that the committee wants us to look further, I would be very happy to receive the minutes of the committee post this committee meeting so that we can come back with more in-depth answers should we not be able to answer any depth questions right now. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Minister Mayor, and thank you very much to you and your department for having put together the presentation, which addressed many of the queries that the members had. I'm sure they're quite keen to pose further questions at this point. So I'm going to give each party 3 minutes to pose questions and make inputs. I'm going to start with the DA.
Honourable Chair, I first would like to say thank you very much for really a very informative presentation by the department. I found it fascinating and thank you very much. And you already covered a lot of areas which I had questions about. Chair, I think we can be very fortunate in that agriculture was classified as an essential service, and that apart from some hiccups, as was highlighted, it was allowed to continue with normal activities. But Dr. Trotsky went quite quickly, a little bit too fast to my liking, over the potential risk for farm workers in terms of infection. And perhaps if the MEC could just inform us whether he is satisfied that employees have been adequately protected from the risks of infections during this time, and perhaps if he would like to expand on the role that he and the department played in the distribution of personal protection equipment. Then the second one, again, there was reference to the disruption of exports, and it seems to me as if one of the problematic areas seemed to be loss of cargo space on airlines and shipping. And I'm just wondering whether the Western Cape Department of Agriculture or the MEC did try to intervene to try and secure more cargo space, perhaps to get the turnaround of ships in our harbours addressed, etc. Then also the presentation was relatively quiet on the ban on auctions of livestock, or the fact that auctions of livestock was not included under the exemptions under the COVID-19 regulations. And if you could just help us, because there seemed to be some disruption there, and also with the police closing down some of these livestock auctions. And then farms are not only producing food, but they also in the Western Cape seem to rely quite heavily in some cases on tourism. And I'm just wondering whether the Department of Agriculture would be able to tell us, is that the lack of tourism or the decline in tourism, should that have an impact on the ability of our farmers to produce food for the future? And then lastly, Chair, if we could just ask them to assist us a little bit more. They highlighted the fact that there's not a shortage of food, but that one of the challenges might be in terms of, from a food security point of view, to get that food to the vulnerable people. And I see they've highlighted the possibility of coupons as a potential solution. But if they wouldn't mind just sharing with us a little bit more of their proposals in this regard. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable van der Westhuizen. I now recognise the ANC.
Thank you, Chairperson. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Chair. Also, thank you very much to the presentations. Chairperson, just to say, I'm going to try and keep it to a minute because you might have another ANC member who would also like to ask questions in this regard, and I'm not sure if that's okay. If you had say a 3 minute for each party, then we just use that 3 minutes. Are you okay with that?
Absolutely, do with it as you wish.
So it's only 3 minutes.
That's correct.
Starting now. Thank you.
Starting now.
Thank you. I'd first like to ask, a lot of people have raised, and that's my one critique about the presentation, that when one focus, and maybe that slide could be put up on the issue of vulnerable communities. There's the issue of food parcels, but nowhere there do we see that the Department of Agriculture is actually talking about helping communities to grow food. I've been informed by people that if you plant celery today, you know, you can get it in a month. The reality is that we're going to be facing this challenge for a long while. And I would have thought that under the vulnerable communities, there would have been a clear focus on what communities, individuals in using flower beds and pots could actually use to start growing food. So that's what I'd like to ask. And secondly, if the department can just tell us at the moment, many people are very concerned with the availability of seeds generally. And also many people have got issues around the issue of GMO seeds. Can I ask, where can one easily get hold of non-GMO seeds, which various individuals and communities could possibly provide? And also, what are the specific measures of support that the Department of Agriculture can offer? And that also links to the concern that when we talked about vulnerable communities, it's food parcels and a voucher. What is the department's view? You know, there's a current debate going on about cash transfers, say if you give additional cash to pensioners, child support grant holders, as opposed to just a voucher. Because if a voucher doesn't allow someone to go and buy at a spaza shop or a local supplier, they might actually be forced in a way to only go to the big supermarkets and so on. And then, you know, there's this overall debate about the fact that soil, seed, and pots are not regarded as essential. I'm not sure if that's the department's interpretation of the regulation. We're also engaging that nationally. But right now, if someone wants to go and buy soil or a pot or seeds, where can they actually go? But thank you very much for the comprehensive presentation. We do appreciate it, and we will follow up with the MEC as well as the HOD and Dr. Turin. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Is that the ANC's time? You've got 30 seconds. Okay.
Could I use those 30 seconds, Chair?
Yes, please. If you wish.
Starting now. Thank you, Chair. I would just like to ask the department how is there another ANC person? Okay. How are they linking up overall?
Another one? Okay, fine.
We can't hear anything. Perhaps you should proceed, Honourable Dugmore.
Okay, just yes, the issue of farm workers. Could we, from the department, have a sense whether they are comfortable that all the farm workers in the Western Cape and the farm managers and the owners have actually sufficient quantities of protective gear? We're very concerned, particularly in the Witzenberg and parts of the Breda Valley, at what appears to be a COVID-19 hotspot. So can we just ask, are you comfortable that everyone is covered, and what are the specific obstacles that need to be removed to actually make sure that this protective gear and the way that farm workers are often transported and the conditions in which they work will protect them and the farm managers and owners? Thanks.
Thank you. I now recognize the EFF.
Mine is going to be very short. Is with regards to the current cases that propped up regarding how farm workers are currently treated with regards to suspicions around issues of having been infected and affected. What is the department doing in terms of ensuring that there is proper treatment of farm workers as civilized workers in a civilized dispensation, which some of these cases are reported in the areas of the likes of Langeberg and as well as the Witzenberg area, of which we have seen that cases of COVID-19 in those particular areas are very much high, and we know those are farm-related economic hubs in terms of agricultural sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I now recognize Good.
Thank you, Chairperson. I think I want to talk about the food security and access to food in poor communities in particular. I think that the food crisis could end up being or be proven to be as catastrophic as the health crisis if we don't get access to food correct. And the department is correct to say that there is inadequate access to supermarkets as you get into the lower income quintiles. So poorer communities have less access to supermarket shopping, and that's why informal trading is plays such an important role in food access. So I have three questions that are basically interrelated. The first is about the impact of the lockdown on small-scale farming. And I'll ask this question because fresh food markets were, although fresh food and food production is essential, fresh food markets were shut down and unable to trade. And so this cut off access to market, as far as I understand from people who've reached out to me, cut off the access to market for small-scale farmers. So my first question is about the impact on the lockdown for small-scale farmers and what the department has done to address that. The second is about the fresh food markets and whether the department made any intervention to assist fresh food markets to trade, since in my view they could trade just as supermarkets can trade with strict hygiene controls in place, social distancing in place. So it made no sense to me that fresh food markets providing the same products that supermarkets were providing were not able to trade, and whether the department attempted to assist them to trade. And then the third aspect, which I think is related, is around informal trading. The regulations were changed on the 2nd of April, and the implementation of the amended regulations has been really chaotic and in some cases extremely cruel. I mean, we are 3 weeks now into the amended regulations, and I am still this week getting informal traders reach out to me because they're unable to access a permit from municipalities. So has the department intervened to assist the informal traders to access both the market and to be able to trade in terms of getting permits from municipalities? Thank you.
Thank you. I recognize the ACDP.
Thank you very much, Chair. The problem is I could not hear all the time, but most of my questions are covered, but just a few, just to speak again about food gardens. Vulnerable communities has now, before the lockdown, had food gardens in order to have access to fruit and veg. Is the department looking, as Member Dagmo said, of helping and assisting these people? Because especially in your poorer communities, there's a lot of food gardens in Bonteheuwel and all over, and it can be one way to address the problems that we are facing, because they grow the food there and they distribute it and sell it in the area for a very, very minimum amount. Another question is also now with your fast foods and those restaurants not opening, the farmers is producing food and they cannot sell it to the Spurs and the fast food. What is happening there? And after producing these food and you cannot sell it, if the department can just elaborate on that. And then just maybe my very last question is what Honourable Heron was saying with the informal traders. It's a big battle, it's a fight and so on. And we know if you go to certain areas, the informal trading is it's big in certain areas, and people for years that was their livelihood. And if you go to the Gagevilles, the Highlands, all over, you think about it, it's big, and people, made a living of that. how are we going to assist, those people with the informal trading and getting access to licenses and stuff? Is the department doing anything to address that problem? Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you. I recognize the Freedom Front Plus.
Good morning, Speaker. Good morning, honourable members. I've listened attentively when I came on that there seems to be very good crops, especially in fruit. I would like a list of all the crops which was very good, but they've lost their overseas export market. Now here's an opportunity. Every problem gives new opportunities. Did the department think, in conjunction with social department, to have a food bank? Can we relieve some of the farmers of their stocks of fruit that's required by schools especially, also required by old age homes, also required by convalescent homes? The most vulnerable people, we can identify them. Can we have our own food bank? We've budgeted for it, and we kill 2 birds with 1 stone. We let the farmers again have a better cash flow, and we take the farm product, which they can't sell overseas, off their hands at a discounted price, of course, and give it to the most vulnerable communities. And also, can we discuss with government to relax regulations regarding hawking, where our people who don't have taxi fare to go to the supermarkets can buy on the street corner, or where these hawkers used to hawk under street conditions. I know a lot have been said about PPE for farm workers, yes, protective clothing, but I say that also, but protect the people's livelihoods there, protect their stomachs. Let's identify the most vulnerable communities. Let's identify where we can get food at the best prices, because the rand is so weak, it won't, and we still can't export. That tells you something. With a weak rand, we should be able to export triple or more of what we used to export. If we have a problem, we're going to take it off the farmers' hands. Will the department investigate this possibility? I thank you. Have I got more time left? I don't want to go over the time.
You have 30 seconds.
30 seconds. I also
if
want
I
to
could just ask Dr. Trotsky, you're still sharing your screen. If you could unshare. Please proceed, Honourable Murray.
Yes, I also want to compliment you, Chair Lady, for the procedure we followed thus far, by being fair to each political party, giving them certain amount of time to ask their questions. It is a huge improvement of the ad hoc committee's way of doing things, and I want to say thank you.
Thank you to you for that acknowledgement. That means that all parties have received an opportunity to pose questions and make inputs. I'll now hand over to the department. Dr. Mayer, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me clearly?
Loud and clear. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for these questions. Obviously, my colleagues, the head of the department and Dr. Trotsky and all the other colleagues will further comment on these questions and try to answer them. But I would like to preface the text for these questions. Some of these questions, there is after us another presentation by the Department of Social Development and another one by Sassa. So some of these questions specifically also relates to their presentations, and we will try to skip some of those questions, Chair, if that is in order with you, because it has a direct impact on their presentations. But coming back to some of these questions, there was a clear issues developing in the course of the week about the ban on the livestock auctions. Honourable Member Andrikus van der Westhuizen is absolutely right. There was an issue, and the specific issues were that the police and the security forces have been stopping farmers going to livestock auctions. Now, this is not correct. process because agriculture, as you know, has been declared an essential service in terms of agricultural production, agricultural distribution, and also selling of agricultural products. And I propose that it be permitted by restricting the number of people at these particular auctions, maybe to 100 people, and that they follow strict social distancing measures, because we cannot have livestock auctions with 400 or 500 people. So our recommendation is that they restrict it to 100 people. Well, this issue was also, Honourable Member van der Westhuizen, was also brought under the attention of Minister Toko Dudisa, and we did receive a letter from her last night that she is currently taking this particular matter up to the national jog, both to the National Kokta Minister and the National Minister of the Security Clusters, the Minister for Justice in particular, and that they will discuss this in the National Command Center. I think what is also very clear is that we have very difficult times, and I think we want to encourage the farming community also in this difficult time, maybe to also in future consider, Honourable Member Andrikas, for them to consider virtual bidding as an option to limit the number of people who are gathering. So these are some of these proposals that we are proposing, but as I said, the Minister has alluded that this is a crisis. It was brought under the attention. She has communicated last night to all the 9 MECs of agriculture that this is now within the National Command Center. I think there is great sympathy and empathy for us, for our case here in this particular regard. I think it is also important to just, and Dr. Trotsky can explain the issue of the exports. I think it is important to know that exports are critical now for the Western Cape, because more than 45% of all the agricultural exports in South Africa comes from the Western Cape. So it is significant. And we have seen also as a Western Cape province, not only agriculture, but general trade on the African continent since 2014 has now increased trade on the African continent, even more than what we are trading on the traditional European and US markets. What I do foresee is that because there is a more stricter lockdown, both in the United States and in Europe in particular, I expect that they will face a shortage of agricultural products. I was on an extensive trip earlier this year to explore some of our market access, particularly in the Netherlands. As you know, the Netherlands is the hub, the global hub for agricultural logistics distribution, and most countries around the world are importing their stuff or exporting their stuff to the Netherlands, and from the Netherlands it is being distributed all over Europe. After visiting the Netherlands, I went to the biggest fruit festival in Berlin. I also spoke to some of our importers, in particular also our grape importers. One person that I've met there was also from the United Kingdom. And so we went there to secure our export markets, not only for the Western Cape, but particularly for the South African foreign exchange that we desperately need now. And export of our agricultural products, as Dr. Trotsky has indicated, we're a net surplus of food production. So for us, these markets are very, very important. And we also particularly currently working on within the MINMEC in establishing also our export logistics, particularly on the African continent. This is a crisis that we haven't been dealing with at this scale since 1933 with the Great Depression. So we are looking as a government through the lens of the whole of society approach, where we can make a contribution in the form of agriculture to assist with this particular crisis. We have also, I think Dr. Mohale can answer the issue of the PPE and the issues of the vulnerable communities. I just want to say, Honourable Member Darkmore and Honourable Member Christians and Honourable Member Mare, absolutely correct. This is why last night Dr. Mohale had a conversation with me about what he calls one house, one garden, because we realize that we are not now just in a lockdown for a month. We are now in a long-term cycle of trying to find a long-term solution to long-term food security, because this thing is going to be having massive implications and permanent behavioral change. And one of the things that Dr. Mogale and I spoken about last night, and I really like his idea of massively rolling out community gardens, but also home-based gardens, to make sure that we also have food security. We will have to have massive rethink about the role of agriculture also in our communities. Chair, I think I will leave that there. They can answer some of these other particular questions. I am very concerned about, yes, from the honourable member from the EFF, very concerned because yesterday in the cabinet we were briefed about the massive increase in the incidences, particularly in the Witzenberg area, in the Breda Valley area. And this is significant. And one of the reasons why this is significant in those particular areas is because those are the areas within the Cape Winelands. And the Cape Winelands has the biggest soft fruit industry in the southern hemisphere. And so for us, these are particularly important, and the workers have been subjected to us. And my first prize is not the export of our fruit. My first prize is the health and safety of our farmers and our farm workers. And I think Dr. Mogale can maybe explain the different protocols that we have put in place together with the industry to make sure that farmers and farm workers are safe during this time, during production, during the harvesting season, and also during the food distribution network. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Minister.
Thank you, Chairperson. Just to add on what my minister has already responded to, we have consistently supplied material to the industry to make them aware of issues around social distancing, all the health protocol around COVID-19. This is what we do almost every week. But since the lockdown, we have on weekly basis engaged with the industry. We call that meeting just a check-in meeting with them on weekly basis, where we pick up on issues and see the extent to which we can assist to resolve those. Including all that is that we've developed what we call a frequently asked questions document that in a way translate or simplify all the regulations to the extent that it becomes easier for farmers and agri workers to be able to respond to the issues. And that is where that led us to acquiring 100,000 masks that were issued to the industry. The question was asked, is that adequate? We think, given the challenges we have, that has gone somewhat. Can you hear me, Chair?
How's it? No, I think it's a perfect opportunity.
Yes, we can hear you. Honourable Dugmore, please mute.
Yeah, I think that is what we could do, and we continue to work with the industry to ensure that indeed agri workers are looked after, because this is an important resource for our sector. So it's important for us that they are supported with PPE whenever it is necessary. I will steer away from questions that I know my colleague from DSD will respond to, issue around food parcels versus food vouchers, because I also know that the President was very clear in terms of what he would like to see happening around that particular space. But Chair, if you would allow me, I would ask Derek to respond quickly to the questions that were raised by Member Mare, and Darrell Jacobs respond to the issue around fresh produce and the extent to which the lockdown has impacted the smallholder farmers in our province. But I'll be doing a disservice if I conclude without mentioning to you, Chair, and the members of the committee, that just yesterday we received a total of about 13 tons of fruit from smallholder farmers as their contribution to the humanitarian relief effort. And I think my colleagues would talk more to it when they come in to talk about the work we do in terms of bringing food security and nutrition to the vulnerable people in our communities. I want to hand over, Chair, to Dirk and Darrell, please.
Thank you very much, HOD.
Chairperson, thank you very much. From my side, I just want to respond, I think, to two issues, and the one is the HOD has, to a certain extent, already answered the question posed by Mr. Murray, and that is we are sitting with a situation that quite a number of farmers are actually, I don't want to call it surplus production, because surplus production gives it a wrong impression. But where there is opportunities in the system, farmers are prepared to share. The HOD has referred to the example yesterday. There's another example of the farmers in Citrusdal that has donated 19 million oranges to NGOs for distribution. But I just want to caution and bring it back to the situation with the fast foods. You may have picked up that the price of eggs has increased by 19% since lockdown. The problem is not, again, that there is not sufficient eggs. Remember, because eggs is quite an important ingredient of fast food outlets. The problem is that layer farmers can't transport the eggs to wherever it is needed, supermarkets or whatever. And the reason why they can't transport it is that there's a shortage of pulp. Normally, for the cartons and things like that used by eggs, you get recycled paper, etc., is made into pulp, which makes the cartons for the eggs. But that is in lockdown. So farmers, layer farmers, can't get containers to put the eggs in to transport it to the market. And that is why the price of eggs has increased. So again, we are working with a very complex system, and any change in that system has got a lot of other unintended consequences that may have an impact. So that is the one part. Please allow me just also to respond to the issue of seeds. And according to our interpretation of the rules and regulations, and it must be very clear that at the provincial level, we don't make the rules and regulations. We also need to interpret it, and it's made at the national level. Our interpretation of the rules and regulation is that food is an essential commodity, and any service needed for the production of that food should be allowed. That would include seeds and fertilizer and all those sort of things. And normally one would be able to buy seeds from the agribusinesses, your cooperatives, or from most supermarkets. And now I'm not quite sure whether there's any supermarket prevent the selling of seed. I don't have an answer to that. I just want to make one comment on GMOs. Now, according to the GMO legislation in South Africa, any GMO incident, they talk about the GMO incident, has to be registered. And it's registered at two levels. The one level is for production in South Africa, and the other is for imports. So in other words, if any seed company want to distribute GMO seed, that seed has to be registered, that incident has to be registered in South Africa. Incident is particular seed, and it is resistant to certain pesticide or herbicide or whatever. That would be an incident. So, and according to my knowledge, there are only 4 incidents has been registered in South Africa in terms of seed, and 2 of those are for maize and 2 of those are for cotton borer and things like that. So no other seed in South Africa would be, no vegetable seed or anything like that would be a GMO seed. If in terms of imported products, there are a number of other processes that need to be followed, but evidently, that would be things like certain types of rice, etc. But that would evidently not be an impact on the seed. So I don't think I must go into too much detail of all the other stuff. I would rather hand over to Mr. Jacobs.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I just want to make sure you can hear me very clearly.
We can, thank you.
Okay, excellent. There were a few questions dealing with one around farm workers. And if you'll allow me just to deal with some of those quickly. I know the HOD has spoken to some of those, but I can just give a little bit more detail. And the one question related to, are we doing enough for farm workers? And the challenge is, I mean, one can never do enough, but I think we are certainly trying within the resources and availability of resources. The donation around the face masks was one of those things. I think what is significant, and we've heard Langeberg and Witzenberg mentioned as particular hotspots, I can say that just under 36,000 of the face masks were donated to the Witzenberg area, and we've got a detailed list of every farm, every facility, every pack house that received a face mask. About 3,000 went to the Langeberg area. In addition to that, and particularly for Cape Winelands district, we had donated something like 150 liters of hand sanitizers, which was a donation that we received from Distel. So I think that's another aspect where we are definitely trying to make a meaningful contribution in improving the health and safety of farm workers. In addition to that, Chairperson, we also work very closely with the Department of Employment and Labour, and we know that labour inspectors have gone onto many farms. We've supported them in that particular role because they do have a critical role to actually assess whether farms are fully compliant, farms and pack houses are compliant with the disaster regulations in terms of social distancing, PPEs, etc. I think the biggest challenge we do face is the lack of availability of sufficient face masks within the province. But I think with the textile industry ramping up, I think in the short to medium term, that particular challenge will be addressed. The other issue around farm workers is with regards to the transport of workers. And in fact, just last night, we received a updated guideline from the Department of Transport and Public Works around provisions for transport of farm workers, because there was some uncertainty or lack of clarity because the regulations itself is not entirely clear. And as Dr. Trusky has indicated, a lot of things we needed to interpret, and part of that interpretation lended itself for other interpretations. But we did get absolute clarity or a lot more certainty last night around issues of transport of workers, and that has now gone out to the industry. Dr. Sepapetsa has also made mention of the fact that on a weekly basis, we engage all of our stakeholders just to understand what is happening in the industry, identify where there are still blockages or areas of concern. And those issues have been taken up as and when they come through, and when there's clarity provided around issues such as different protocols that are shared immediately with the industry. I think the other issue around what have we done in terms of assisting fresh food markets to trade and informal trading, accessing of permits from municipalities. I think it's important to understand that the Department of Agriculture has a seat. At the moment, I'm occupying that seat, which on a daily basis is part of an economic cluster engagement chaired by the Department of Economic Development and Tourism. And the moment any issue comes to light which impacts on the market, so challenges around fresh food markets in terms of trading permits and the like, these issues are dealt with on a daily basis through the economic cluster. The city of Cape Town is represented in that cluster, and matters are dealt with, as I say, on a daily basis. So I want to believe that as and when challenges and blockages emerge, we have been able to deal with it on a daily basis through this cluster. I also just want to say, I think there's been a lot of areas of uncertainty in terms of interpretation of regulations, and I've been very fortunate to have a direct line to the representative, the legal representative at SAPS, where we've been able to clarify and give absolute certainty around a number of issues in terms of the way that SAPS have interpreted certain regulations, and that again has been fed into the industry as well as shared in the economic cluster engagement, which happens on a daily basis. I think, Chair, that's I've tried to cover some of those areas which I think have not been covered up till now. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you very much to the department for their answers to our questions. I know members have some very short burning questions that they would like to pose in this, which will be our final round of questions to the department, as I'd like us to wrap up by 15:30 in order for us to be able to engage with the Departments of Social Development and Sassa. So members, I'm going to recognise each party again, and if you could please pose your most burning questions in 1 minute. If you do not have questions, kindly indicate so. I'm going to begin then with the DA.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, unfortunately, my question regarding cargo space for the export of flowers and other agricultural products was not addressed. If I could ask, because it seems to me, as Dr. Trotsky has said, it's quite a complex issue, and it could be that if we can't export, we're going to have job losses, and job losses lead then to food insecurity. Then on slide 28 of Dr. Trotsky's presentation, there was a reference to requests from Western Cape mayors. If you could just expand on that, please. And then, Chair, if I could lastly just ask, and I know this may be a little bit off topic when it comes to food security, but the Western Cape deciduous fruit industry's harvesting season makes use of seasonal workers, and that season has now come to an end, and I believe there are apparently thousands of people hoping to return home to other provinces. Is that an issue that the Western Cape Provincial Parliament should take up? If the experts could just assist us in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you. I recognise the ANC. Any questions?
Yes.
Honourable Admiral, please proceed.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I would just like to ask, because I don't know if I heard it correctly, but in terms of the seeds, if the department can clearly indicate right now, if tomorrow someone wants to get non-GMO seeds, where can they get them? And then secondly, what is the we support what the HOD was saying according to the MEC about, I think it's one home, one garden. But like if there's tomorrow someone wants to say, I want to start a garden in Fremesheim, Grootbrakrivier, what can the department actually help them with to do that? And then lastly, in regard to the, there is a report that restaurants are going to be, are asking to open up the kitchen so that they can prepare food and that food can then be distributed to those. Does the Agriculture Department know about this initiative, and where is the initiative at the moment?
Thank you. The EFF.
You may pass, Chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Pleho. I recognise Good.
Thanks, Chairperson. I'm actually just going to repeat a question that I don't think was answered from my first round, and that was about the impact of the lockdown and the closure of fresh food markets on small-scale farmers. I mean, we've heard that small-scale farmers have made big donations, but is that because they don't have access to the market, or is that legitimately surplus produce? So What is the impact on small-scale farmers? Thank you.
Thank you. ACDP?
Thank you, Chairperson. Maybe this is not related, but the continued attack on the safety of our farmers and farm workers on farms is a threat to food security. Just this morning, I got a WhatsApp from somebody in the Eden district just to raise that also to with the COVID-19 and all the efforts doing there, is the department still securing our farmers and farm workers on the continuous attacks on our farms? Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you. Freedom Front Plus.
Thank you very much, Chair Lady. I want to make a statement in the question. It's obvious that our risk management has been found wanting, virtually non-existent. We're not geared to handle anything like the coronavirus. We've been caught with our pants and our ankles. But the corona has also handed us a great and a unique opportunity to make huge policy adjustments with little political fallout to address the issue of food shortages and to make people less vulnerable to things like that. So I want to know, what regulations do you feel has hampered you from fully carrying out your mandate, your department? And secondly, will you also not only consider food gardens, but you know, I grew up, my dad had chickens in the yard. We had excess eggs. We never went to the market for eggs because we had chickens laying eggs. And I don't know what regulations there are nowadays that stop people from having chickens again in the yard. That used to be one of the things which we grew up to be used to. So I just want to let you know, if you're aware of it, you know that the poor, the poverty culture is different to the culture of the high-class people in Constantia. We learn to survive. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm now going to hand over to the department. We are fast running out of time, so if possible, if any of the inputs are available in writing, we would appreciate that. Otherwise, if the department could perhaps answer as many questions as possible in the next 10 minutes. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, let me respond to the issue of seasonal workers, since it was discussed this morning at the Western Cape Cabinet meeting, and Dr. Sebopetse also commented on that thing. The issue of seasonal workers is as follows. We have now, in many cases in the Western Cape, have come to the end of the harvesting season. And some of these seasonal workers want to return home. But I think we don't want to use the word seasonal workers. We want to use the term essential workers, because they are essential workers. And what does an essential worker do? When he's finished, he wants to go home. It's after the harvesting season. The workers are frustrated. They've earned their money. They have their money. They want to return to their families. It's a crisis. So this is
trying to organize.
Would members please mute their microphones?
Thank you, Chair. So some of these essential workers want to return home. Remember, many of them work on commercial farms, and when they return home, they want to support their families. They have no money. And when they go home, they also become subsistence farming. And there is currently some issues regarding their traveling. And Dr. Sebopetse can maybe also indicate what is going to happen tomorrow in this particular regard. I have written a letter to the National Minister, Disa, in this particular regard, because seasonal workers want to go home, they want to be with their families, and they are here. And in Afrikaans, there's a spreekwoord wat sê, nou raak die man kwaad. En 'n man wat kwaad is, doen kwaad. I rather want the man to be happy, united with his family. But I also want the person that go back to his family to be properly tested, properly screened, so that we don't export people that are positive in terms of the coronavirus. The industry has indicated they are willing to assist also with the traveling, making sure that all those regulations are in place. But currently, they are not allowed to be transported from us to the Eastern Cape in particular. We think that is an error. We think people must be given the opportunity, provided they are properly tested and they are screened and they're certified as clean, they can go back to their family. But this is something that we currently are taking up, and I think Dr. Sepopetse would like maybe to make some additional comment. But I would like to maybe just make another comment, Chair. I think Honorable Member Mare is right. This crisis presents us with an unique opportunity. We have to radically rethink agriculture. And I think I have had a discussion with my HOD, and he is already starting working on a post-COVID-19 agricultural summit, because what we want to do is to relook at the implications of COVID-19 for agriculture and develop a post-COVID-19 10-year plan for the agricultural sector here in the Western Cape. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Minister.
If I may come in very quickly, please, because of your time.
Please, HOD.
On the issue of essential workers, in fact, we would want this group of people to be referred to as essential workers, whom they actually are. They just happen to work seasonally. We have since received a legal opinion from SAPS that confirmed that they can actually be allowed to move from this province to where they come from, in this case in the Eastern Cape. And the industry and us developed an SOP, I think, in the last 2 days. And tomorrow farmers will be testing that because the legal opinion was tested, was shared with the rest of the country. And we believe that we will never know the strength of that opinion unless we test it following the due protocols. So that is something that farmers will be doing already this weekend. Member Dakmo asked the question, what if somebody asks him they want to establish a food garden? We are able to provide seeds and seedlings and some compost when necessary. We're able to do that immediately. Although we are not in our offices, we are actually working from home as essential services. So we're able to provide that support immediately to whichever sector of the society is in need of that support. But I must also qualify that this is not something that we are starting anew. We have established gardens over the years, but I think we are now saying because of the opportunity presented to us by COVID, we need to massify that and ensure that every home is able to produce their own food. The question raised by Member Mare around production of eggs, it is also included. It's probably because we are used to the word food gardens, but it's basically production of food by households. We also able to assist households with 10 layers. We've done that in the past and will continue to do that to enable them to produce their own food. Lastly, in terms of the regulations, what has hampered us? One was that when the lockdown was declared, the regulation said harvesting was not allowed. Immediately, our minister wrote to national minister, and that was unlocked. Farmers were then allowed to harvest. The issue that is still sticking with us is the issue around cut flowers, that farmers are not considered, producers of flowers are not considered essential therein, and that is still something that is very much with us. Thirdly, the issue that my minister referred to, the question around the wine export, that is a big issue because we are not the only wine producing country in the world. If we lose that shelf space, it's probably going to be very difficult for us to reclaim it. I'm going to ask Derek to quickly respond to the cargo space that Member van der Persen had raised, and I think in that would have, okay, the last question that was raised by Honorable Member from Good is the impact of lockdown on smallholder farmers. Markets, in our view, is not a challenge for these farmers as we speak. They are able to sell, and my view is also that the hawkers are allowed to sell. That's as far as I'm concerned, in terms of the revised regulations. The municipality had experienced challenges with people who had not necessarily been hawkers before the lockdown, and they want to start afresh. And there were challenges, but permits had been issued to people that had been using particular space in the locals. And if that is not resolved, I think we are happy to raise that with our colleagues at local government to unlock it. Derek, if you can quickly respond to the issue of and directly to the issue of cargo space and the seeds directly, because we haven't got enough time. Thanks very much.
Chairperson, thank you very much. I will be very brief. In terms of the cargo space, I think we must remember that agricultural products, we are usually talking about heavy products, large volume, low value. So normally the only way one could export agricultural products is when you piggyback on planes with people in it. There's normally a surplus cargo placed in airliners. The only time where you can rent a cargo plane is in certain instances where you need to catch the right time of market abroad. For instance, at the beginning of the table grape season, it's worth a while for the guys from the Gariep River to rent a cargo plane and fly directly from Uppington to Europe with a plane full of table grapes. So yes, one can rent cargo planes to fly products out, but it's going to be extremely expensive and probably not worth your while. So until the time that air travel opens up to a certain extent again, we will have a problem getting space in aircraft to export product. In terms of the GMO seeds issue, there's a national legislation regulating GMOs. There's a register of GMO products, and there are certain procedures that need to be followed. According to our knowledge, there is not a vegetable seed incident registered to date on that register. So yeah, that is the only thing I can say about that. So most vegetables should not be GMOs in South Africa. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much. And on that note, then I'll say thank you very much to the Department of Agriculture, the Minister and HOD for your inputs, and to the officials present and for answering our questions. We're very grateful for your efforts this afternoon. We will correspond with you post this meeting. Members, I think we're going to take a short break and we will then excuse the Department of Agriculture. Thank you very much. In the meantime, I will ask the Department of Social Development if they would start sharing their presentation so we can get the admin out the way. I'm not going to adjourn the meeting, but we're just going to pause it for 3 minutes. So please don't disconnect. If you'll just mute your mics and turn off your cameras, and we will then reconvene at 15:38.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Minister. Much appreciated. Members will then continue with the Western Cape Department of Social Development in 3 minutes. Thank you. Good afternoon, members. We will now resume our standing committee or ad hoc committee meeting. It is 38 minutes past 3. We say a warm welcome to Minister Fernandez, Head of the Provincial Minister of Social Development, as well as to Dr. MacDonald, Head of the Social Development Department. I don't know if they'd like to begin by introducing their team, please.
Good afternoon, Chairperson and honourable members. Thank you for the opportunity. We do have a team, so I would want to exercise the option for them to introduce themselves. Thank you. Dr. MacDonald.
Hi, yes, Robert MacDonald, Head of Social Development, Western Cape.
Dr. MacDonald, do you have other officials present that you'd like to introduce?
Yes, I see Mr. Hewu was trying to get through. His microphone seemed to be muted. Mr. Charles Jordan is our Chief Director for Welfare Services. Mr. Mzandile Hewu is our Chief Director for Community and Partnership Development. And then we also have Ms. Marion Johnson, who's our Chief Director for Business Planning and Strategy. And then we should have Mr. Lionel Arnold's on as well. He's our Director for Community Development.
Thank you very much, Dr. MacDonald. Minister, could we perhaps start with you? I don't know if you'd like to make some introductory remarks, and then if we could move into the presentation, please.
Thank you, Chairperson. I would like to take the opportunity to thank the committee for allowing us to talk to food relief or social relief. Just over a month ago, our world was rocked when the President made an announcement about lockdown. And I think the last 5 weeks have been really turbulent in that we have moved from COVID-19 as the eye of the storm to a hunger challenge, as if it were, and which has placed social development front and center in terms of the requirements. I just want to indicate for the members that Cabinet has set up a work stream, and there is a humanitarian work stream of which social relief and food is a subset. So I will be talking to the subset. Minister Meyer, as the Head of Agriculture, is in that grouping, as well as Minister Schaefer and DCAS, because their volunteers assist. So I need to say, Chairperson, that there's been a lot of speculation and allegations made, and I would like to express the view of our department that food relief must be apolitical and non-partisan, and it should not discriminate against anyone. And then also, just for the interest of the audience, to indicate that our food strategy was to supplement existing protocols that are in place, because DSD is not in the business of food delivery. However, we created a safety net, and that has created quite a bit of noise. But once the presentation is done, we would be keen to welcome questions, take any proposals. I'm sure they would be channeled through your ad hoc committee, and accept that we have great synergies now. Just yesterday, we had a meeting with the top big NPOs. We had the Solidarity Fund in a meeting last night, and we are talking to the retailers. So there is quite a bit happening behind the scenes. But for the purpose of this exercise, DSD will speak to its mandate and the work that we are doing in terms of social relief. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Minister. Dr. MacDonald, will you lead the presentation?
Thank you very much. Ms. Marion Johnson will be leading the presentation, and then we will take questions afterwards. I think Ms. Johnson has the presentation ready to put up for everyone to see. I'll ask her to then commence.
Good afternoon, everybody. Minister, Chairperson of the Standing Committee, honourable members. I just want to is everybody able to see the presentation?
No, not yet.
Not yet. Oops. Anything now? Still nothing.
No, still not.
Not a good start.
Ms. Johnson, you had it up before the break. I saw it on the screen.
Yes.
There we go. There we go. We can see it now. Just put it in presentation mode. There we are. Not quite. There we are. Thank you. We're in business. Please proceed.
Apologies to all the honourable members. We would like to, our outline for our presentation will cover the principles of our food relief implementation plan. We will provide an overview of it, including criteria for accessing it, the number of parcels delivered, and also what we are doing with respect to vulnerable groups in shelters, survivors and victims of gender-based violence, and of course, as well as our NPOs out there we support. And then, of course, the impact with respect to substance abuse. On the 23rd of March, as we are all aware, the President indicated that the lockdown would start from the 26th of March. As agriculture has noted, the lockdown impacted negatively on poor households who normally subsist on a week-to-week income basis, and also, therefore, the need for food relief was extended beyond our approximately 1.6 million Sassa beneficiaries, and also beyond Sassa's existing budgets and capacity to cover these additional people. Because owing to that, the Provincial Cabinet therefore directed that the province assist with emergency food relief and prioritising, but not limited to those who are currently not receiving any form of state assistance. So as Minister indicated a few moments earlier, the aim of the Western Cape Government Supplementary Food Strategy is to supplement Sassa, NGO, local government and national government short-term emergency food programs to highly insecure households during and immediately after the COVID-19 lockdown. Our principles that underpin our plan is based as far as possible, as I've indicated here, on the use of existing delivery mechanisms that are already in place in the province. This includes the schools, our ECDs, our community-based feeding schemes, including our community nutrition and development centers. We are also partnered with huge humanitarian relief organizations, local civil society networks and municipalities. Minister indicated the need for a food relief in terms of non-partisan, non-discriminatory in the way we deliver, and that we must be equitably distribute this with priority given to those in greatest need. Our modes of food delivery must also be flexible and needs to be able to adjust to suit the changing circumstances within each community. How have we allocated our funds? The allocation of the emergency food provision plan includes 20 million to 50,000 food parcels, each of which supports a family of 4 for a month. We will allocate these parcels to selected NGOs who then prepare and distribute them. 5 million has been allocated to supplement existing food relief initiatives where gaps are identified, and these may be split between parcels and cooked food. These funds come from our reprioritized budget baseline. There is also an 18 million rand allocation to the Department of Education for special school feeding, and they will target approximately 485,000 existing school feeding scheme beneficiaries. And they will get one takeaway meal at approximately 1,000 schools. We also looking at 10 million to increase the number of beneficiaries receiving food at our existing feeding schemes for 6,500 people. To date, the DSD has spent 30 million for the COVID food relief interventions on the 50,000 food parcels and hot food at feeding sites. We will be allocating the last of this during this week. A further 60 million has been allocated by the Department of Local Government to assist non-metro municipalities. These municipalities have also used 6.7 million, from their own funds towards food relief. The other food relief initiatives we are being implemented but not funded by the province would be your Sassa social relief of distress, with applications going through the National Call Centre and parcels deliveries which have commenced since the 14th of April. There is also the network of about 6,000 NGO feeding schemes that are not funded by the state. And of course, Sassa still continues to pay grants to its beneficiaries in the province on a monthly basis. The Lotto Fund has also approved an allocation of 1.4 million rand, and the Solidarity Fund will be providing 250,000 parcels for distribution across the country, of which the Western Cape will receive 14,800 parcels via 2 NGOs. With our own community-based feeding structures, we are adding 1,792 beneficiaries to the approximately 5,000 who normally receive access to hot meals at our sites. 4,859 food parcels were delivered to existing targeted feeding beneficiaries, and a further 5,433 beneficiaries will be provided with support at our 20 community nutrition development centres across the region. Therefore, through 92 community-based feeding sites, 12,000 vulnerable people will be provided with food relief on a daily basis during the lockdown. Honourable members, if you would like a list of the 92 feeding sites, these can be provided by the department. At the food parcels delivered until the 21st of February, 3,910 have been delivered to beneficiary families in the province. As at 12:30 p.m. on the 23rd of April, the number of food parcels delivered to families increased to 4,285. When we look at the criteria for accessing food relief, those households affected by the COVID-19 infections, in the following instance, a member who tested positive for the virus and is in quarantine with her or his family at home, a household where a member of the family tested positive and who has insufficient means to sustain themselves during the lockdown period. Thirdly, a person who is on medication or suffers from a chronic illness and has insufficient means to sustain themselves and has been assessed and referred by a local clinic or registered health practitioner. Then we also have people, a person and his or her household who have insufficient means to sustain themselves during the period, who has been assessed and referred by a registered humanitarian relief agency, a DSD office, a registered NPO, or a municipal manager. In this instance, the elderly, child-headed households and grant-awaiting beneficiaries will be prioritized. Social workers in all our DSD service delivery offices conduct telephonic assessments, and approved households then have the parcels delivered to their door. Apologies once again. Sorry, are you able to see the presentation still?
Yes, we can, but it's not in presentation mode.
Oh dear, I'm terribly sorry. I have no idea what happened there.
That's all right. And there we go. Thank you.
Apologies.
Not to worry.
I see the slideshow is not. I'm not sure what's happening to it.
Maybe just keep it on that view then.
If you don't mind, yeah, I would appreciate that. With respect to our partnerships in food distribution, we have 4 NGOs who are working together with us in terms of distributing the food. The table in front of you reflects the 4, and you can also see the spread of parcels and the cost for the parcels that they are going to prepare and distribute. We also have a summary of food supplies here reflected in this table, where you can see that there is soup, porridge, pasta, juice and chicken that is being provided, and also relief goods in the form of hand sanitizers, surface sanitizers, latex gloves, face masks, sanitary towels or pads, washing powder, mattresses and hygiene products. Just a very brief overview of Sassa grants in the Western Cape region as of January 2020. I'm sure that our Sassa colleagues will expand more on this a bit later. But according to this, there were approximately 1.2 million beneficiaries in the province, of whom 1,088,000 are children receiving grants. And the total value of the grants is around 1.44 billion rand. The department is also partnering with the Department of the Premier with respect to the food relief referral system through the Western Cape Government Call Centre. Honourable members and Chair, as you can see, by the 20th of April, we had around 15,000 names of potential recipients coming through and calling the call centre. These potential recipients of food relief, their names have been distributed through to our regional officers who then conduct the assessments. What I can also indicate is that by the 23rd of April, that is yesterday, an additional 8,000 plus names were also received from the call centre. Most of these are telephonic phone calls from people wanting to find out whether and how they can qualify food relief. The Western Cape Government Call Centre did experience a constraint in the beginning when we were busy with taking the calls for food relief, and that had to do also with the number of inbound lines that they had available. But this obstacle is being removed as they are working very closely with our Centre for E-Innovation in the province. Under normal circumstances, the capacity of this centre was 17 resources. They've got sourced additional agents. So in the Western Cape Government Call Centre itself, there now are approximately 28 agents together with a number of volunteers. We also, through the Western Cape Government Call Centre, was able to get the services of an additional service provider. And currently we have up to approximately 100 agents working with inbound calls. This has also meant that the time taken for a call has substantially decreased. Although it might seem a lot, 100 agents, What has happened is that they work shifts, so they're not active all the time, but during peak time, there are 55 agents taking inbound calls. The peak times are currently between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. weekdays. Our calls peaked the Tuesday after Easter to about 14,000, close to 15,000 calls a day, from under 10,000 on Good Friday, and it has also somewhat decreased by the 18th of April. We must also remember, honourable members and Chair, that in addition to the call centre, there are numerous other points of entry for food relief applications. A lot of them coming in as walk-ins or even as calls to the regional and service delivery offices, through NPOs, and also through local municipalities. We are also currently working with the Centre for E-Innovation on an end-to-end data management process, where we are looking at how to automate reporting processes so that one can have real-time data in terms of what is happening with respect to the process of issuing a food parcel to a beneficiary family. And we're also looking at spatial representation of this data through mapping, so it can be easily available and easily viewed. Coming now to our vulnerable targets groups in our communities. With respect to our shelters for the homeless, we currently fund 27 shelters at a cost of 19.8 million rand. This budget provides for 3 daily meals. It provides for social work supervisors, as you can see, 2 social work supervisors and 22 social workers and 4 auxiliary workers. With respect to the lockdown, we have established an additional family centre in Somerset West, family shelter, that will accommodate up to 120 family members. Municipalities have also established temporary structures, and they receive food for these shelters from NGOs appointed by the National Department of Social Development. We, as the Western Cape Department of Social Development, provide psychosocial support as and when required. Currently, there are 6,681 homeless persons registered in the shelters, and bed spaces are at full capacity. We have various measures that are implemented at all shelters, your universal precautionary measures that focus on hygiene, the screening of people entering shelters, and of course strict hygiene practices, social or physical distancing in terms of space around the beds. There's also space for self-quarantine and isolation. Of course, suspension of visits by family members and service providers here. There is also networking with local clinics for testing and referral. And there is information sharing with homeless, with adults, and of course, again, the focus on personal hygiene practices and the social support rendered by our social workers. Some of the challenges faced by the department with respect to shelters for the homeless. Some homeless people don't want to remain in the shelter environment. Some suffer from psychiatric disorders and addiction disorders, or are unable to adjust to a confined environment. The numbers vary on a daily basis, making the provision of relief services challenging. There is a risk of theft of mattresses, blankets, and other relief goods. And there's also the legal uncertainty around the roles and responsibilities in terms of running the shelters, and on whether people in shelters are allowed to leave. The regulatory requirement for temporary shelters may not be compatible with the need to decongregate people and maintain social or physical distancing during lockdown. Some of the remedial measures, we are in constant contact with municipal officials and deal with all referrals for psychosocial report. We have had NGOs come on board to provide additional support on site where needed. And SALGA has also communicated with the National DG of Social Development, requesting engagement on the legal clarity around the roles and responsibilities of different spheres of government in relation to shelters. With respect to gender-based violence, we also have shelters. We have 20 shelters for survivors of GBV at a cost of 28 million, and there are 2 types of shelter accommodation. Our budget provides for the 3 daily meals for 20 social workers, for 15 social auxiliary workers, and 60 house mothers who work shifts. Our stage 1 shelter accommodation, of which there are 4, they admit at-risk victims of crime and violence. These victims are accommodated for the first 14 days in a stage 1 shelter, where they are transferred to a stage 2 shelter after the initial 14 days, and SAPS assists us with the transport of clients between these shelters. The Department of Health also assists with medical screening and the medical needs of our clients, and therefore it's essential that shelters work closely with the nearest health facility. Our protocols, again, is the normal regulatory processes with respect to COVID regulations. No victims can be released from facilities. There's no visitation allowed. There's been the suspension of family reunification and interaction programs. New admissions will, however, be processed provided that the facility complies, of course, with the COVID-19 regulations and the victim is provided with protective wear. We also still have our social worker reports, which are used to process the victims for entry into the shelters. And we also adhere to the COVID-19 protocols. As at the 21st of April, we've got 320 beds that have been filled. We currently have 19 vacant beds in our stage 1 shelters, and currently 57 vacant beds in our stage 2 shelters. The challenges is again with protective gear, and also that clients that should have exited cannot do so due to lockdown. The impact of this could then be that we have no bed spaces available by the end of April for new intakes. The department is working in terms of accessing protective gear, and we have submitted our requirements to the National Department of Social Development as requested by them. We've also requested the National Department to consider relaxing the guidelines so that we can allow our clients that have completed their program and are ready to reunify with their families to be allowed to exit by the end of April. Finally, with respect to our substance abuse and COVID-19 preparations, we currently fund 6 inpatient treatment centers at a cost of 19 million, and this makes provision for 726 bed spaces per 6 to 9 week treatment cycle. Again, the current lockdown guidelines apply: no release, no visitation, suspension of family reunification and interaction programs, no new admissions, except in the case of involuntary admissions as ordered by the courts. And the services provided at these centres have been declared essential, and workers should be allocated with the prescribed permits. Challenges here is mostly around the fact of exiting clients at the end of the treatment program, but of course we can't do so owing to the lockdown regulations. We have, however, requested the National Department to consider relaxing these guidelines and allow those who have completed and are ready for reunification to be allowed to exit by the 30th of April. Finally, Chair and Honourable Members, we'd just like to indicate that we have funded 1,882 of our NPOs in April. So our NPOs that would normally have accessed their funds have been able to do so. The payments have been made to the tune of around 91 million rand. And we've had 57 of these NPOs that we couldn't fund due to non-compliance issues in terms of the non-submission of the audit financial statements. Chairperson and honourable members, that concludes our overview of the work that the Department of Social Development is currently busy with in the province. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Johnson. We seem to have a point of order from Honourable Dugmore. What is your point of order, Honourable Dugmore?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
I can hear you, but before you proceed, could I ask Sassa to start sharing their presentation in the interest of time? Thank you, Honourable Dugmore. Please proceed. We can hear you.
Yeah, and thank you very much, Chair. Chair, I think those of us that are connected to the meeting chat have raised with you that given the time constraints for all of us to raise questions, given that we have 3 minutes for each round of questions after presentation, there are obviously a lot of other issues that are coming up the whole time. The proposal which we would like to ask, to put forward, is if we can agree as a committee that the committee staff would capture the questions that we are asking as part of the minutes, and that can then be forwarded as a request to the department to provide answers to those questions. I think this is provided, obviously it's not abused, it's a very efficient way and technologically possible that these questions that we're putting in the meeting chat would be able then to become part of the record of this meeting and then simply collated as further questions. Obviously in the verbal questions, if those questions are answered. Yeah.
I specifically asked that if your point of order was regarding the chat function, that you hold it to the end of the meeting so we can discuss it then. The chat function is very distracting. I've received 47 messages from you in the last 2 hours.
From me, 47?
Well, 47 from the ANC on the chat function, and that's akin to talking during a meeting. So I would like the chat function to operate for points of order only. You are most welcome to submit additional questions, which we will send to the departments, but those must please be done in writing on email, because the chat function is very distracting for all members, because the little bubble beeps every time, or the lights go on every time somebody makes a point in the meeting chat. So it should be kept to an absolute minimum. Just as in a normal meeting, you wouldn't be having side conversations while somebody is presenting. So I want to fully allow you every opportunity to participate and raise questions, whether it be verbally in your opportunity, in your question time, or otherwise in writing from the departments. You are most welcome to submit as many as you like. However, the chat function is problematic in that we can't have streams and streams of communication on the function. I hope you'll understand that.
Chairperson, may I, on a point of order,
can I raise my point of order?
Sorry, Minister, please proceed.
I just wanted to indicate that we cannot see the chat. It says that we need to be invited. So unfortunately, we have no sight of what is happening in the chat box. I just thought to alert you to that. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honourable Nkondlo.
Yes, Chairperson. Can I just raise a concern about you changing rules from the initial, when we started with this ad hoc committee, and I remember it was part of what you did in the same engagement, where you considered some of the questions that come to the chat. I do not understand at what point the chat became problematic. All we are asking that, given the challenges of participation, because we are many here, we are 15 members, and would want to raise questions to the various presentations. What we are asking is that those questions, because you've got sight of those questions, that's why we're even using the chat to indicate to you that we want to speak, so that we do not do disruption and just be speaking, using our mics. So I'm asking and pleading with you that whilst you give the 3 minutes to the parties, which is the new rule that you introduced today, that we also consider those questions, and where they can be engaged by the departments, they can, as part of their responses that they're giving, respond to those questions, or where they can't, they can still, you give us the comfort that they can still be able to respond to our questions. Thank you.
Honourable Nkondlo, the departments can't see the chat. So that's why I'm asking that you put it in writing. Also, it's 3 minutes per round. And in the last session, members were equally invited to submit additional questions in writing, and I received several from your party, which we have now put in writing to the Premier and Health Department. So we are proceeding in the same way. I'm now going to proceed with the presentation from Sassa. I would like to welcome from the South African Social Security Agency, Mr. de Graas, who's the Acting Regional Executive Manager for the Western Cape, and Mr. Janssen, who's the Manager of Executive Support. Please be very welcome to our ad hoc committee of the Western Cape Provincial Parliament. I'll now hand over to you for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon to all the honourable members and the officials. I hope my presentation is up, because I can see it, and for everybody, I hope it is there for everybody.
We can see it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, this is the first time that Sassa has the opportunity to do such an extensive presentation on just exactly where we are and what we are doing. And I really appreciate the time given to Sassa to speak on the matter of the food parcels, and especially relating to COVID-19. I will cover the following areas: the purpose, legislative framework, applications for the food parcels, the deliveries, the food parcels dispersed, and the available staff, because the food parcels distribution must be seen within this particular context. I already covered that one, so I will move on to the next slide. I think it's very important that we do understand that Sassa actually operate within the framework of the Social Assistance Act, and especially the SRD, the Social Relief of Distress Policy framework. And the criteria that we are using, especially for the food parcels, would be as follows. Beneficiaries who are in receipt of a social grant, they are excluded from receiving this food parcel. And the approach there is because they already receive an income in the household. If I just look at the other criteria that we actually used for the food parcels, beneficiaries whose social grants applications could not be completed due to the lockdown. And here you have beneficiaries that came, applied, and we were perhaps in the process of awarding them the letters, but we couldn't do that. Beneficiaries whose temporary disability grants lapsed during the months of February, March, and April. And Madam Chair, just for March and April, and excluding February, we are actually sitting with approximately 12,000 beneficiaries whose grants actually lapsed. And we had a special focus on these persons for them to get their food parcels. And we know that it will be a challenge for them coming back also and getting the disability grant. And especially for those whose medical coverage lapsed during April 2020, we have decided within government that we will continue with the payment of the disability grant for those whose medical coverage lapsed in April. A decision must still be taken by the National Department of whether we should continue for those whose medical coverage lapsed in February and March. And we should actually know very soon if we will then continue paying the disability grants for these beneficiaries also. For those whose temporary disability grants, we will continue paying from May. That will be in place for a 3-month period. And if we bring the February and March temporary disability grants beneficiaries also on board, they will also then receive the 3-month payment. And the reason why we are doing this is because we know that when we start with the processes again, there will be pressure on the Department of Health. So if we pay the temporary disability grants for 3 months, it will alleviate that pressure on the Department of Health, and Sassa then can focus on the new temporary disability grant, the temporary applicants that will be coming through. The next work category that we focus on for the food parcels beneficiaries who could not collect their social grants due to administrative functions. And this can be failed due to the failed bank verification, they lost their cards and PIN reset. And here, Madam Chair, we know that the post offices were also locked, but in our agreement with the post office, they decided to open certain post offices, not all post offices, as from Monday past, where the beneficiaries could do their PIN resets and get a new card. But beneficiaries also had to travel. For example, there's no post office in Mitchell's Plain. So both those beneficiaries must actually travel then to the Belleville post office for the PIN resets and for the reissuing of the cards. And this is one of the issues that we're also faced with. So for this particular category, we also made provision for the food parcel. Now, as I've outlined, these different categories will be the main ones on which we will focus. But we also go then to the category of households with no income. And here we're working in conjunction with the Department of Social Development. Madam Chair, I would like to come later on back to this one with households with no income, and especially when I focus on the budget that we have received. I've listened to the presentation from the Department of Social Development. We in the Western Cape, we established our own call center because we knew that there will be a problem with that national call center. Because at this stage, the national call center has received 167,000 calls through which they must work. And this is the number for the Western Cape. Up till now, we have received 6,649. And I've taken the decision here that every manager, every senior manager will get the list to start phoning these beneficiaries, because as the persons would call in, we say to them there's a turnaround time of 24 hours. With the current staff actually in the call center, we cannot meet that specific target. And that's why the instruction that list will be provided to all senior managers, including myself, actually to start phoning these beneficiaries and at least to provide them with some response. That is just in terms of our call center and how we are being flooded actually in that regard. The process that we are following is that we have received lists from the different councillors, from the community members, and as we have received the list, we provided to our local officers and also at our regional office where we establish different teams, and they are in the process of working through those lists, phoning those beneficiaries, and as I indicated, excluding those who are already in receipt of a disability grant. We complete the manual applications, and on a weekly basis, we then place the orders with our 4 service providers who has the responsibility for the distribution of the food parcels. Now, once the order has been placed, these 4 service providers will then go to our different local offices to drop these food parcels. And from the Sassa side, I must actually thank the law enforcement for helping us, and especially during this past week, to secure our local offices for the distribution of these food parcels, and it happened without any incident taking place. For week 1, we distributed 689 food parcels. And in the Boland Overberg, we can see the numbers there, 137, Metro 1, Metro 2, Eden Karoo, and the West Coast. And if one can see how we have increased it then in this particular week where we distributed 1,825. And I have the pleasure to informing the members that for this coming week, we will distribute 3,128 food parcels throughout the Western Cape. And this is a figure that I've just received, 3,128. And I will make the distributions available per local office as we have seen it there. And perhaps I can just give it to the different members so that they can see how we have increased it. Cape Town, for next week it will be 100. Easter River will be 150. Guguletu 181. Mitchell's Plain 243. Caledon 142. Paarl 248. Worcester 136. Beaufort West 100. Oudtshoorn 144, George 65, Vredenburg 65, Vredendal 148, Athlone 218, Bellville 528, Khayelitsha 538, Wynberg 122, which would bring me to 3,128. But what's important is the following slide. I only have 170 staff members because the Essential Services Committee declared the administration of social grant as a non-essential service. And this is a matter that was before the Essential Service Committee from organized labor as well as from Sassa. And the decision then was taken by the Essential Service Committee that the payment of social grant is an essential service, but that actually exclude the grants administration. And that is the reason why our offices are closed. And I have great appreciation for the staff who indicated that they are willing to come and help with the processing of the applications. And in total, we have approximately 700 staff, but only 170 volunteered to come and assist us in processing the food parcels in. I think I've missed out on one slide, Madam Chair. Let me just check where. I would like to come back to this slide because this is the most important one for me, for the members also to take note. I only received 36 million for the social relief of distress. I received no extra funding for the COVID-19, no extra funding. The distribution of the food parcels that money has been made available to the provincial government. Of that 36 million, Madam Chair, I used 10 million for the immediate relief when there's a disaster, when there would be fires. I actually provide the immediate relief in those instances. And with that 10 million, I also provide a once-off cash payment to those affected during those disasters. I normally set aside 11 million of the 36 million for the school uniforms. But because of the crisis that we find ourselves in with regard to the food parcels, I'm now taking away that 11 million and I add it to the rest of the 15 million, which would bring me to 26 million that I would have for the food parcels. But Madam Chair, the members need to take note. For this financial year, I will not be able then to issue any school uniforms to children who are in receipt of the child support grant and where those persons cannot actually afford a uniform, a school uniform. And with the 26 million that I have, I would be able then to get to approximately 22,000 food parcels. And if I look at my temporary disability grant, already have a number of 12,000 actually in that regard. And with the rest of it, I must see actually where I can provide those food parcels. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vikas. I'm now going to take questions from the members. I'd like to thank both departments for having prepared these presentations for us today. Members, I'm going to do the first round of 3 minutes per party, starting with the DA, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Gillian Bosman here. Maybe, Chair, if I can start from the bottom and maybe just ask Sassa whether they could indicate what the monetary value of the 3,168 parcels is, and also if they could tell us whether the data that's been presented on food parcels delivered includes the food parcels that were looted. And then if they could maybe let us know what the coordination of relief efforts is between Sassa, the NGOs, and DSD, because what we saw in Mitchell's Plain a few weeks ago was that there seemed to have been no coordination. And then also what communication channels are available for people who do not have access to the internet or to the telephone. So we know by next week certain applications are going to be available via WhatsApp and via telephone line. How is Sassa dealing with that issue? And then certain areas in the Western Cape, specifically in the Garden Route, there are only certain doctors certified to carry out Sassa medical examinations. How is Sassa dealing with that issue where, say, for instance, I know in the Garden Route and the Kannaland municipality, there's only 4 doctors for the entire region that verify grant applications. So how is Sassa dealing with that? And then if the department can perhaps give us an indication of how many NGOs they are working with, and if they could just clarify the criteria for access to food relief. Does a household have to be affected by COVID-19, or is it where that household is no longer in possession of an income where there's a level of food insecurity? And if they could also list how many NGOs are working with DSD, and perhaps if they could tell us what the plan is for the new normal for homeless people post the lockdown, what's going to be happening to homeless people. And if they could maybe perhaps list how many cases of gender-based violence have been reported and referred during the period, as well as how many cases for social support has been processed. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Bosman. I now recognise the ANC.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me, Chair?
I can. Please proceed.
Thanks, Chair. Chair, I welcome the presentation of both the departments. My first question of my questions is to the Department of Social Development. What I want to know is how many food parcels has been distributed to the different municipalities in the province, and can the department be specific? Is there a list of all beneficiaries in the different municipalities? If not, then why? Because we want the department to be transparent. And then how many domestic violence cases has been registered with the department during the lockdown period? If so, how many victims have received assistance so far? And how many victims is in facilities managed by the department? And my second last question, are you aware of any COVID cases in any of the shelters? Then my last question, Chair, is to the MEC. I just want to know, do she agree with the call to close the Strandfontein? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions from the ANC?
Chair.
Honourable Syed, please proceed.
Chair Member Syed, I just want to know how much time does the ANC have left, or if I could come in the follow-up stage, if there's going to be
one and a half minutes.
Okay. Okay, then let me come in now, Chair. Mine is it's more of a proposal, but it's linked to a question. I want to get a sense from both DSD and Sassa. And it ties in with a point raised by Member Bosman around a coordinated approach. I wanted to get a sense from them as to, have they considered a more coordinated approach where we could have a...
Apologies, Honourable Syed.
Okay.
As a point of order from Honourable Nkondlo and Dagmore.
Okay.
Honourable Nkondlo, what is your point of order?
Chair, which point of order?
You sit on the chat point of order, and so is Honourable Dagmore. We've both raised points of order on the chat.
You want to deal with the issues I raised on the chat? I've got questions there. So if you are gonna allow me to ask the questions that I've raised, I've already written my questions.
No, you've raised a point of order on the chat, as is its intended purpose. Do you have a point of order?
Ma'am, my point.
Do you have a point of order? Please raise your point of order.
Chairperson, I'm saying the point of order, I've already raised it in my initial space you gave me. So now I'm waiting for a chance to speak so that I can raise the questions I've written on the chat, since you have made a ruling that you're not going to allow those questions to be read out loud here as you are speaking. So I'm waiting for my chance.
Are you going to be speaking instead of Honourable Syed? Is that what you're saying?
Honourable Syed has already been recognized, so I wouldn't have spoken whilst he's already on the floor.
Okay, so just to be clear, Honourable Syed is now speaking for the ANC.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Please proceed, Honourable Syed.
Can I continue? Thank you very much, Chair.
Please continue.
Chair, I wanted to get a sense from DSD and Sassa, and as to whether there's been a consideration to set up a provincial food command at a high level.
Apologies, Honourable Syed. I've just seen that there's a point of order from Honourable Dagmore who'd like to address me. Honourable Dagmore.
Okay.
Chair.
Honourable Dagmore, please raise your point of order.
Thank you, Chair. No, Chair, we really don't. I think you've misinterpreted what we were trying to convey. You've encapsulated on the chat group the letters P-O-O, which when expressed says poo, right? So when that expression of poo was raised, Member Nkondlo raised the issue on the chat group saying poo really. So I think you misinterpreted that as a attempt from us to raise a point of order, but we've agreed that at the end of this discussion, we are going to raise, firstly, that the chat group should be used for questions. Secondly, that, like the MEC Fernandez said, like including our guests on the chat group so that they can see. But we never asked for a point of order. You, I think, have a poo obsession, And I think that's
No,
actually what is
Honourable
now
Dugmore,
interrupted.
please, I call you to order. It's POO. Let's be adults in this meeting. POO stands for point of order. The chat, I have already ruled, is only for points of order. A point of order may not be considered if the presiding officer has already ruled on the matter. So I have already ruled on this matter, so we will now proceed with the meeting. The chat is only for raising points of order. Honourable Syed, please proceed.
Thank you, Chair. So I wanted to get a sense as to whether there's been a consideration for such, for a in light of having a more coordinated approach, a central food command that will include the various arms of provincial government, that will include Sassa, that will include local government, and also the NGO sector, and that can also consult in the spirit of non-partisan approach with the leadership of the political parties that are in the legislature. Then number two, linked to that, has there then been a consideration to, based on that, to have a central beneficiary database? Because what I'm picking up here is that Sassa has a database, DSD has a database. Would it not be better in a more streamlined approach to have a central beneficiary database? Basically one database in the province, and then eventually getting to a point where we can then still use the service providers, we can use the non-governmental organizations, but within a streamlined approach. And then getting to a point where, in light of the need to ensure that there's physical distancing, to actually do away with the food parcel idea at some point, and to move towards possibly an approach whereby cash is sent overall, where we basically phase out the food parcel approach. And so that also local economic empowerment can happen, where we can find that actually people can be empowered to actually go and buy food at local producers. They can go to hawkers, for example. So I just wanted to get a sense as to whether those ideas are actually being entertained. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Syed. I now recognise the EFF.
Thanks very much, Chair. From our side, the first part is the level of capturing of the database from both DSD and as well as Sassa. If they are comfortable with the pace that they are moving on, compared to the kind of uprising and discomfort that is found on the ground by people who are vulnerable to this beneficiation. And that's the first question, because there is a serious challenge of discomfort on the ground. And then if I check the numbers that have been reported, they are relatively low. And then the second part would be in terms of shelters. Just wanted to understand that if both these departments or the department and Sassa, they are comfortable with the behavior there, and in terms of keeping those institutions like in the same category as security cluster kind of arrangements such as prisons, because there is a serious discomfort that is found there in terms of behavior from those people, and then we're expecting them to be calm because we do not want unwarranted unrest that would be experienced there. Then lastly is indeed on the issue that was raised by Honorable Bosman on the criteria that is being followed in terms of identifying NGOs that are involved to work hand in glove with both Sassa, and especially in terms of the distribution of food parcels. And then lastly is that we have noted that there is a certain budget that is allocated to the Department of Education. And then just want to understand that what would be the rationale behind that, because in terms of maintaining social distance, these kids are supposed to be at home, but if they are gathered somewhere outside their homes, is it a sign of distrust from both social department and Sassa in terms of distribution of those food parcels to school children that they've got to go and fetch them themselves than being distributed at home, where parents and there is proper monitoring that is taking place. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable Tseho. I recognise Good.
Thanks, Chairperson. Before I ask my question, can I just ask you for clarity? Are we still having the special committee meeting to focus on vulnerable people? Because the department has gone beyond food and into shelters and GBV, and I don't want to. I mean, I have questions arising from that, but I want to know if I should ask them now. Are we going to deal with homeless shelters and gender-based violence when we deal with the vulnerable issue?
Yes, Honourable Heron, we will be dealing with those two items under protection of the vulnerable next week.
So I can just focus on food now.
That's correct.
Thank you so much. So my first question is about the distribution of food parcels. The department indicated that there are NGOs that are distributing the 50,000 food parcels. And the minister started off by saying that they did not accept any politicization of this distribution. And I think, saying it is fantastic, but what actions are we taking to prevent it? Because there's enough evidence, and I'm gathering more and more evidence every day of the politicization of the distribution or the access to pass food parcels. These parcels appear to be either the DSD 50,000 parcels, and in some cases they are the City of Cape Town's parcels that somehow the mayor is giving funding directly to councillors to provide food parcels. So there's a combination, and I would like the minister to please address how we're going to prevent the politicization of the distribution of food. Then the NGOs are in communities apparently collecting numbers and names and numbers. I heard from people at Mitchell's Plain that someone in a street has been tasked with collecting 2,000 names. So that appears to me that these NGOs and these 50,000 parcels, we're chasing numbers and maybe not necessarily seeking out the most deserving people. I don't understand who these people are in various communities who are collecting names and numbers against a target. The woman in Mitchell's Plain apparently has 2,000 names that she needs to get. So who are these people and why are they appointed and what are they doing? And then with regards to the funding on slide 6, the Premier announced 5 million rand for additional 10,000 meals a day to take it up to 20,000. But your slide talks about 5 million rand for gaps in food. So is this the 10,000 and are you doing the 10,000 hot meals a day? And why, if you're doing 10,000 hot meals a day for 5 million rand, do you need 10 million rand to provide 6,500 meals per day? So I don't understand that. And then I want to ask the slide that's currently up from Sassa. When the official from Sassa presented this slide, he said something like they didn't get any funding to provide food or additional funding to provide food. The funding went to the province. And so if we can just explain or clarify what he meant by that. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Heron. I now recognise the ACDP.
Thank you, Chairperson, for the opportunity, and thank you for the presentations. Just the one question to DSD is the call center decrease in response time. Now, what is that response time now when with the number of people agents working there? I've received a call yesterday that one of our councillors went to Mitchell's Plain at the Sassa office, and the Sassa office said in Mitchell's Plain yesterday that they only accept names from ward councillors to give in name for food parcels. Is that so? And who? Because I heard the gentleman say that NGOs, community members can also bring names, but they've got an understanding that they must only receive names from ward councillors. Another problem is, and we've mentioned it yesterday, and I like Honourable Heron, I'm also getting information of the politics in all of this, because they're just looking now, today, they're just getting some evidence as to how people are in Cederberg and Matsakama, and also Mitchell's Plain, where they sign up people as members for political parties, and if you don't belong to that political party, you don't get a food parcel. So if that can just be addressed, and the distribution of food. I believe that there's some councils also distributing food, but they're not clear from where they get the food from. They'll give me that information. Just another last question is the psychological help to the homeless in the shelters. Has that now increased because they're in a camp? Has that increased because the DSD is giving psychological support to the homeless in that? And did that now increase because of people feeling that they are in a tent, and are they keeping the department very busy at this time? Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honourable Christians. I recognise Freedom Front Plus.
Chair, I listened to all the debates and talk, and I'm sitting here very emotional. You know, God let his sun and his wind, everything shine equally on the poor as well as on the rich, on the educated and the uneducated, on those who earn $1 million a year and those who earn 3,000 a month. They all get his sun and his water and everything and wind equally. And here we are trying to say who qualifies and who don't qualify, instead of looking at who's hungry, who's really at the bottom. I want to appeal to you. Even if a lady gets a pension from Sassa, I know the people. I've been in this game for 44 years. Now they live off this grandmother's pension because they can't walk, and I can't go and cha. The mother's pension or the granny's pension of 1/8, they all live from. But that granny can't get a food parcel to feed the household who's dependent on the granny's pension, because Sassa says you get the pension and 1,800 is enough to feed that 5 people in that house. I want you to think. Don't look at how much the person earns or who he is. Look at the need. I have people, I don't want to talk about it. I don't know how many I've given. I went to ShopRite and Checkers. I paid money so they can have a week's food. Checkers give me a number, reference number. They must take that reference number with my PIN I've given, and they go to them, and there they can buy food, or they can draw the money and they can buy the food for themselves. A simple method. No politics involved. Nobody hoarding food. The supermarket get from the province the okay to give a person with ID so-and-so 200 or 300 rand with which they are going to buy food at that supermarket, and we reimburse the supermarket, and those people get food with dignity. That's what the president said, with dignity. Not the lorry stopping in front of their house. Everybody must see, I'm poor, I'm getting a food parcel, I'm indigent. Allow that woman to go to the supermarket and go and buy her own food. Give back her dignity. Bring the churches involved. The churches in the colored community has always been in the forefront of advising parents, and when they haven't got food, they go to the church to pray. They pray. But you know, they say God isn't answering because the answers is in the hand of the councillors. They will decide if their prayers will be answered. I'm appealing to you. I had a lot to say, but I'm too emotional to say it. I say to you, in the few minutes I've left, Mitchell's Plain got almost 1 million people, and I know how poor they are, and 243 food parcels were given out there, and we feel so proud of ourselves that for 2 million people, we had 243 food parcels. I can't take this anymore, I'm sorry. That's why I don't put it on video. I speak on audio because I'm leaving the site now. I can't take further part. I say, bring the churches on board. They also NPOs. They also registered as NPOs.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Thank you, Honourable Murray. We are dealing with very serious matters. Thank you for your inputs. I'd like to ask the Minister and the two departments to respond, please.
Thank you, Chairperson. I think the Honourable Murray, his statement expressed the need that is felt out on the ground. And sadly, resources, if you look at 50,000 food parcels from DSD and the Solidarity Fund that is doing 250,000 across 9 provinces, then it pales into insignificance. Our research team is doing some work, and we are looking at a phase 2 because we realize that we are now staring a humanitarian crisis in the face. And this is why, and Mr. de Graaff gave a good account of Sassa's the shortfalls that they are experiencing and also the challenges. And we stepped in, and Mr. de Graaff actually sits with our work group now. So I don't want to get to answering the questions, but I just wanted to say that the Honourable Murray's statement encapsulates the pain that we all live with every day. It's unprecedented. We have never had to deal with a challenge like this. And I need to say, I get phone calls. My phone number was distributed. People call me at 1 o'clock and they say, Minister, ons het nie krag nie, ons het nie kos nie. And unfortunately, I cannot go beyond the scope that we have. So I want us all to just reflect, because to me, it is about the humanity in this exercise. And sadly, some of the questions might have veered offline, but we need to find, and I think the statement I'm going to make, COVID-19 presents us as a society to reset our moral compass, so that when we come out of COVID-19, we embrace all those values that when we started out in our democracy, we want to live and give people the freedom and the dignity that they deserve. I too am touched. But unfortunately, we work in a space where we are governed by legislation. We cannot just willy-nilly dispatch. There are some statements that were made which I can speak to, that I'm going to ask the HOD and our team, and then afford Mr. de Graaff an opportunity to respond, and then I'll pick up the questions that were addressed to me. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you. Dr. McDonald?
Thank you, Chairperson. I think before I answer the questions, just to contextualize the situation, and that is that I do not believe that it is possible for government to be able to meet this particular challenge alone. And I think we've seen in the last few weeks a huge contribution coming from the private sector, the NGOs, faith-based organizations, and many private individuals who are reaching into their own pockets and opening their own kitchens to their communities. So I think it's very important to realize that COVID as a crisis is flattening countries around the world. We are no exception to that. In fact, we are more vulnerable than most of the developed countries that have already completely buckled under the pressure economically and in terms of their healthcare systems. And we are fortunate to have had a short heads up period before COVID reached us, and that enabled our government to begin to prepare. But the things that have to be done now are extreme from a adjustment point of view. What we have done in the Provincial Department of Social Development is only one piece of the picture. But I think what we will come to later on, where the questions about coordination were asked, and that is that in line with some additional regulations issued at a national level, which set up a command structure for COVID-19. The province is also expected to set up a command structure, which we've done. And one of the work streams in the command structure is humanitarian relief, including food relief, which has been set up. And that body, which is chaired by Mr. Brent Walters, who's the head of Cultural Affairs and Sport, has pulled in the 5 district municipalities, the City of Cape Town Metro, the SAPS, Sassa, the Department of Social Development in the province, and is also got members from a number of other provincial departments on it. And that structure is a critical coordinating point, which is beginning to enable us to pull together some of the major initiatives that are happening. But I think it's important to realize that there is about 6,000 non-government organizations operating in the space at the moment that we've been able to identify as actually carrying out food relief in various shapes and forms. And it's not really possible to fully coordinate all of that, because some of these are once-off donations that are done. Some of them are organizations that go to different areas to provide food relief. So it's a really big space, and we can only really coordinate the biggest initiatives, while there's a lot of smaller initiatives that which are going to continue, which cannot be regulated or that cannot be pulled in. There's no regulatory requirement that anyone who wants to run an NPO or a voluntary association to provide food relief during this period, that they must get a permit or that they must register or anything like that, unlike with private businesses, which have to register with the Department of Trade and Industries portal in order to be able to provide essential services. It provides a lot of room for spontaneous assistance, and I think if it wasn't for that, we would be in a much worse situation than we are right now. But the reality is that this is never going to be a government-only initiative. I think also to emphasize as well that as the COVID crisis broke and the lockdown began, there was no specific allocation available at the time for the disaster relief. And what this then required was, or at least in the provincial government, and what this then required is very urgent budget work to free up funds so that we would be able to start to provide some kind of assistance. So the amounts of money that are with the Department of Social Development that have been allocated are amounts of money that we have reallocated within our budget as far as we can go, without any additional money coming externally from National Treasury or Provincial Treasury for the 3-week period of the initial lockdown. And of course, with the extension of the lockdown, that created a lot of additional pressure. So I think all of the things that we've done is to try and maximize all existing food relief channels that we have, including the ECDs, the school feeding schemes, and all those other things. But then also to bring the additional food parcels into the space to supplement what SASSA is doing, because as Mr. de Graaff has noted, SASSA also had no additional funding, and they are further disadvantaged by the fact that the majority of their staff are not operating because a ministerial directive at the national level has closed local SASSA offices, and as Mr. de Graaff mentioned, the SASSA is not included as essential services. So they are basically operating with staff who are voluntarily coming forward to assist. So it is far from an optimal situation, and we entered this crisis without any of the necessary structures or budgets in place because of how rapidly it descended upon us. But I think that all the officials involved have tried and been working non-stop since the disaster was declared, and most of the officials involved have not had a single day off since that time. They've been working through weekends, through the Easter weekend, 12-hour days, trying to get things moving. So I think it's important that we also realize what's been going on behind the scenes. But let me get to the specific questions. The first being how many NGOs are working with social development. In terms of the feeding scheme space, we've got feeding schemes at 92 sites, and then we have the 4 large NGOs distributing the food parcels, and then we have a further approximately 700 of our 1,100 funded ECDs also providing food. So the list is rather long, and I can provide it in writing to the committee so that you can see the list of all organizations, because I wouldn't be able to read it out here. I think also we should also bear in mind that we are continuing to run all of our social development services at the same time as taking on this enormous new task. The social development department's services are all declared essential services, so we are still continuing to run the child and youth care centres, including the orphanages as well as the secure care centres. We are still running all of the homes for the disabled, the older persons' homes, the substance abuse treatment centres, and all the shelters that we originally were funding for homeless adults. So we are continuing to carry all of that, and then in addition taking on the feeding scheme. The one advantage, of course, is that a lot of vulnerable people are already in our net, because we have about 27,000 people that we feed every day in the residential facilities that we fund, which also further serves to spread the support across the province. But I mean, the biggest single form of support from government in this province is the 1.6 million people receiving SASSA grants, and you would have seen the president's announcement that those will be increased from next month, which we are hoping will further help to alleviate pressure. The question about the criteria, and do we only work with people affected by COVID-19? Essentially, the wording around COVID-19 is we're talking about people affected by the lockdown, not just by the illness. So much as the particular business support packages at national level are targeting people who've specifically lost income due to the COVID-19 lockdown, we are likewise providing food relief to people who have lost income due to the COVID-19 lockdown. So it doesn't mean that people have to have actually contracted COVID or a family member contracted COVID for them to benefit from this. We have got a partnership with Health where we specifically target food relief for people who have been infected with COVID and who have to self-isolate and are not coming into a government-funded or government-funded isolation or quarantine site, because people who are isolated because of COVID infection at home aren't able to go out to the shops because they're supposed to stay in their home, and therefore we need to provide some kind of support to them. So those cases are referred to us by Health, and we do provide a food parcel specifically to them and make sure every one of those people gets a food parcel, but it's not limited to them because the numbers are not that high yet of people in isolation. So the parcel process is only one leg of the food relief program, and I think the focus is very much on food parcels because a lot of food parcels are being delivered by NGOs and other organizations alongside government, and it's quite easy to confuse what is happening from government side with what's happening from the private sector and NGO side. But food parcels are useful in this time because they contain non-perishables which last a long time, are easy to transport, and it's a safer option in many ways than having a a site where we provide food to the public, because when you have a soup kitchen and things like that, things get out of hand if there's not enough for everyone, and it can turn quite violent and disruptive if there's a large crowd that descends on a feeding site. The question about the plan for a new normal for homeless people after the lockdown, I think, we as social development will continue rendering the services of the shelters that we are already funding. So it's only the shelters that have been temporarily set up that are going to wind down after the lockout. And it will depend also on the lockdown regulations and what they say. So all the shelter work that's being done, particularly the temporary shelters, is all as directed by the national regulations and directions. It's not a standard practice in government to try and contain all homeless people in shelters. So we do continue to run the shelter network that we've always run, and that has proven generally adequate for the people who wish to take up those spaces, with some shortages in some areas. But bearing in mind that a lot of the people who are now in the temporary shelters are not necessarily people who come into those shelters on a regular basis. And many people prefer not to come into shelters. And I think we've spoken about that before in the committees, because most shelters for homeless adults have certain rules that not everyone wants to abide by. And also the people can't stay together as a family in those shelters, because of the rules that the NGOs have, because they're meant to be a temporary arrangement. They're not meant to be a permanent accommodation. So I think in terms of the plan for the homeless, one of the things that is also being done at the moment, as I mentioned, or was mentioned in the presentation, is that SALGA has raised a concern about the fact that municipalities are being brought into the space of running shelters when it's not something that falls directly within their usual constitutional mandate, and they are suggesting that social development should be taking this over. However, the National Department of Social Development is of the view that social development only has a limited role in relation to services to homeless adults because of a legislative gap in this regard. There is no legislation that speaks to this. So there was an agreement that between SALGA and Sassa that they will discuss the legalities and, if necessary, propose some legislative process to address this, because I think the gap has become starkly clear during this lockdown period. But again, I think it's during the immediate aftermath of the lockdown, we will have to assist the homeless people as the need arises, but we don't have any additional funds to sustain in the long term the increased numbers of the people that are currently in shelters, and I also doubt that many of them would want to stay in those shelters, as we've already seen a lot of the homeless adults want to leave the shelters and are being prevented from doing so by the police because of the lockdown regulations. The question around the number of gender-based violence cases reported and referred to social development, I don't have the exact figures now. We did have a report early in the week, and we have noticed an increase during the lockdown period of cases coming through the gender-based violence command center, which is a national call center. We have noticed approximately a threefold increase in the numbers. Usually it's about 10 per week or so, and it's gone up to about 40 per week during the lockdown. But as I say, I'm not in possession of the latest figures. I see that it was 41 was the last figure. So, but that was the beginning of this week. So we'll get more statistics probably at the beginning of next week on how many further cases have come through the gender-based violence command center. But all of those cases have been referred to us, and we have taken 23 into shelters according to the last set of statistics. The question of how many cases for psychosocial support, we will also have to compile a final report on that over the period, because cases are coming in every day and the figures are constantly changing. The last figures I received was 27, but I think there was probably more that haven't yet been reported. And we've got a referral protocol between ourselves and the Department of Health that has been put in place, where the Department of Health refers cases to us where they are picking up the need for psychosocial support, and also the Department of Health pulls us in where they have difficult reintegration cases of people who've been in quarantine and isolation, and that we then need to help with the reintegration. There's not a lot of those cases, but occasionally the community or family do not want the person to return. They fear the person will bring illness, and then we have to work with the family. I think I just saw a note here from one of my chief directors. We're getting about 2,000 cases for assistance across the psychosocial support assistance across the board per week. But that includes cases across the board, which we normally do get cases like that, irrespective of the COVID-19 situation, but it may be slightly higher than average. I think also, again, I should emphasize our social work services are an essential service, so they are continuing during this period. So child protection cases and substance abuse cases and all of the other work that our social workers do continues. And we've also been called in to assist with prisoners who have been released on parole, where our probation officers are having to assist with reintegration of some of those cases too. So we are still hard at work as social development, doing what we normally do outside of the COVID disaster period. The next question was how many food parcels distributed per municipality? We are developing a consolidated database which will try and bring together all of that information, because we have, as social development, we have two sources of food parcel distribution within our own space. And one is the Community and Nutrition Development Centers, which is the CNDCs. We've indicated in our presentation there's nearly 5,000 parcels distributed by them. And then we also have the 50,000 parcels that are being distributed by the four big social relief NGOs. So we just need to reconcile the information on where each of these parcels have gone, and we've collected that information, but it still needs to be cleaned, and it is still moving every day. So today we had another several hundred parcels delivered this morning. So the figures keep changing. So I think we'll probably be in a position to give that sort of a municipal breakdown within the next 2 weeks or so, if not sooner. But we don't have it today because the data is not ready. What we are also trying to do is include in that mapping information on where Sassa's food parcels have gone, as well as information on where the Solidarity Fund's food parcels have gone, because the Solidarity Fund has just provided money straight to NGOs in the province, which are then proceeding to deliver food. So yeah, we will get a municipal breakdown, but it will be in the next 2 weeks or so. We'll have something concrete. And also when the distribution is complete, we'll have more time to actually do that work, because at the moment our staff are focusing on just getting the food out there. The question of the gender-based violence cases I have mentioned above already. And the statistics on the number of victims in the facilities managed by the Department of Social Development are listed in the presentation on page, let me just see quickly. Yeah, we got the totals on page 24. So we've got 320 beds filled with cases of gender-based violence, 19 vacant beds in the stage 1 shelters and 57 vacant in stage 2 shelters. Then we had the question about how many are we aware of any COVID cases in shelters? In the shelters for victims of gender-based violence, I'm not aware of any cases. We have not had any reported cases. In the shelters for homeless adults, we have also not been alerted to any cases. We have been alerted to 2 cases in older persons facilities, which I won't name here, but suffice to say that the Department of Health has moved in quickly and has done tracking and tracing, and so far it's only been the 1 case in each of the 2 places. One is a retirement village that is not funded by the Department of Social Development, but the case appears to have been contracted from a local supermarket. And then the second one is a old age facility, and that one has also only been the 1 case so far. So thus far we're quite fortunate not to have had any outbreaks of COVID in any of our residential facilities that the social development funds or runs. The question about the closure of Strandfontein, whether MEC agrees with that, I'll leave for the MEC to answer at the end. And then the question about a central food command, I think I mentioned earlier, we've now set up a command center, provincial command center that feeds into the national command center, and there is a humanitarian relief command work stream, which is working on the coordination, and they are busy mapping all food relief interventions and pulling in all food relief players that they can. But as I mentioned, there's thousands who we cannot pull in because they are spontaneous, quite small operations everywhere. And it's actually quite amazing to see what is happening on the ground in terms of people reaching out to each other. The question about central beneficiary database, we do have a central beneficiary database in the province, and we do work with Sassa with that. In fact, Sassa's a social relief of distress process involves them engaging us around the beneficiaries, and we do assessments for them. So Sassa and DSD are working off a single database in a sense, not all the time, but we're sharing it at routine intervals so that we can check who's benefited, and so we don't double up with each other. The NGO sector, on the other hand, has different ways of working, and some of them work with beneficiary database, some of them just want to hand out to everyone, and that's their right to choose how they do that. I think the municipalities themselves are also working in different modes. Most of them are distributing in general. I think I must also mention that the food provision on the ground in community-based feeding sites like CNDCs and soup kitchens, those have their beneficiaries that are locally identified, that they know of, and they are involved in selecting those beneficiaries and assisting. And then the ECDs are serving the children that are on their that are enrolled at that ECD, as with the school feeding scheme, where the schools have created a special feeding scheme during the recess or holiday period that is targeting the same children that normally attend the school. So that's a targeted approach for them. Then the question with about are we comfortable with the pace of the database being formed and the delivery on the ground and the numbers being relatively low? No, we certainly aren't comfortable with that pace. We are trying everything we can to accelerate it, and we are bringing in additional support. We've got a number of large organizations now offering to help us with delivery of as many as 20,000 parcels at a time, to accelerate things as much as we can, because we want to get those 50,000 parcels that we have out by the end of the month. And I think that that we may be able to, by and large, achieve that. But I think the reality is that even if we have all of the food that we've got in our system distributed, and SASSA's contributions, as well as the Solidarity Fund, there's still going to be big gaps. I think the reality as well is there are differing types of needs out there, because there are some people who are on receipt of SASSA grants who still are struggling very much to get through the month, because the grant is often shared among people in a family. We also know that the shopping centres are becoming increasingly difficult for people. With the looting of local spaza shops and grocery shops, many of them are closing up, and people are then forced to go to the larger shopping centres. And when they go to the shopping centres, the waiting times are between 3 and 4 hours sometimes for people to get their shopping. There's a huge risk of contagion in that space. There's a lack of social distancing in many instances, and of course a couple of large grocery stores have already been closed because of COVID transmissions. So those are quite a risky space. So we also understand a lot of people would like to be able to access food parcels even if they do have money, because it would be preferable to having to face that nightmare, and that's completely understandable. So I think a lot of the people who are wanting and reaching out for food parcels aren't necessarily people who would qualify, because they may well have some source of income, but they are still trying to get extra support because they are uncertain about their future, and they are also not wanting to face the risks associated with going to the shops. So it's not a simple matter at all. And I think that, you know, the way that social development is distributing food, we are doing it in a highly targeted manner, which is slower than just distributing in general. But the amount of funds we have for this is so limited that we can't actually afford to give everyone food. It's impossible. We would basically bankrupt the provincial government with the amount of money required. We've done the modeling, and to be able to feed everybody who potentially needs it, and that we reckon we are we've mapped the highest risk wards in the province as approximately 3 million people who potentially would need assistance as the weeks go by. I mean, that you're talking about R500 million a month, and this province does not have that type of money unless we start stripping funds from health and education, which we cannot afford to do at this point in time. So I think it's important to emphasize that what the province and even Sassa is doing at the moment, these are kind of a stopgap measures, because the president has announced a much larger injection of funds into this space with the voucher system that's coming, and the additional funds for social relief of distress, as well as the increased grants. And that is the kind of money, and I think that amount was in the region of 500 billion, or was it 500 million? But it's a very large amount of money, of which we don't know how much is coming to this province yet. We haven't been given a provincial allocation yet, but it's a huge sum of money that the province would never be able to muster on its own, nor would any of the municipalities. So I think it's important to emphasize that this is a stopgap. It's not the solution. If we were in a position where we had to deal with this on our own and there was no national support whatsoever forthcoming, then we would probably be designing a different system. But I think that knowing that this is a short-term system, this is the fastest thing we could have put in place. The other question about DSD, are we comfortable with the way that the shelters for homeless adults are being run? I think the whole concept of clustering homeless adults into shelters for us is not ideal. I think it was something that was pulled together at very short notice in terms of the national regulations, which had very specific requirement about putting all homeless adults into contained sites, and the number of sites that could be set up at short notice was obviously limited. So I think we're very glad this period is coming to an end, because it has not been pleasant, and it has not been a ideal situation for the people that have been running the sites, or the people that have been in the sites. And I don't think anyone will say that this went smoothly, but I think under the circumstances, the same approach has been adopted in every province in the country, and in every municipality in the country, and they've had to make do with it. But I also understand why Salga is not happy with this situation, because it's outside of the normal realm of municipal functions. I think the next question was, why did funds go to the education department? Well, as I mentioned earlier on, no one department really has sufficient systems and budgets in place to be able to meet the scale of the demand we're facing at the moment. So the idea has been from the start to try to utilize existing feeding mechanisms as far as possible to get food out there as quickly as possible, because trying to invent new systems slows you down and it prevents you from reaching the people quickly. You end up focusing on developing internal processes before you can even start rolling things out. So we did try to maximize the benefits of the huge reach of the school feeding schemes, which we know normally reaches 483,000 children a day. Unfortunately, in this period, we've only been able to reach up to 100,000 children per day due to various factors, including that some of the schools were worried that they would fall foul of the law if they took on the special feeding scheme. Which is understandable because there was legal uncertainty, but I think that's beginning to be resolved now because there hasn't been any further debate about that. But it is unfortunate that there was that mixed messaging at the beginning, because I think we could have reached a lot more children. I think,
Dr. McDonald, if you
yes.
could wrap up, if that's all the questions. We'd still like to hear from Sassa, and I'm afraid we have to conclude the meeting at 17:30, as many of the members do have to depart at that time.
Okay,
Chair, can I also raise a quick point of order, Chair?
Honourable Syed, your point of order?
Chair, I'm getting messages from members of the public that the sound is not on the YouTube channel currently after Member Marais' input.
Okay. Can you please raise that on the WhatsApp group exactly what the issue is, so that IT can look at it, because they are on that WhatsApp group with us.
Sharp, thank you.
Dr. McDonald?
Yes, I'll try wrap up. Sorry, there was quite a few questions. Okay, so the question about what action are we taking to prevent politicization of food parcels? I think if anyone's got evidence of food parcels from social development or being politicized in any way, it should be brought to the attention of the MEC and myself, and then we will deal with it accordingly. I think I'm sure Sassa will feel the same way, bearing in mind that again there's a lot of food parcels being distributed that are not from social development, and therefore you know, those kind of situations are beyond our control. But the way we've made sure that the food parcel delivery is not politicized is, firstly, we are not involving councillors in the process. Secondly, the social workers are doing assessments of potential beneficiaries. And thirdly, the people apply through a number of different channels, so they can't be blocked at a local level, for example, because they can still go through the call center, or they can report to the local DSD office to ask for help, or they can call our local offices, or even go report it through a municipality. So we've tried to keep a lot of channels open for people to report, but then it all comes through to the same database, and it's assessed against the same criteria by social service professionals to make sure that it is done in an impartial manner and based on professional standards. The questions of people collecting names against a target, I would have to get more details of what the name of the organization was and all of those things before I can indicate whether or not it had anything to do with the Department of Social Development. The question about the funding on slide 6, 5 million for food parcels or for cooked meals. And originally, yes, we were going to add the 5 million for 10,000 hot meals per day, but we did hit a snag with the directions about cooked food being given out at CNDCs, which we then decided we should perhaps redirect it either to sites where they are dishing out food which won't be at risk because of closure, because the CNDCs did temporarily close, or alternatively to use it to bolster food parcels, whichever delivery mechanism will be quicker. So we've got to be responsive to developments on the ground, and we'll be rerouting that. Why is there a different amount of 10 million for the same amount of food versus the 5 million? The 5 million was for a 1 month period. The 10 million was for a 2 month period. So I think that may be the reason. We didn't indicate that the periods there. Then Sassa, to clarify what funding went to the province, I'll leave to Sassa. And then finally, the last two was Sassa office accepting names from ward councillors, also for Sassa. And then the last one, how busy are we being kept at DSD with the psychosocial support at the Strandfontein shelter? We have had a number of call outs there, and we've got an NGO that's been working on site as well with substance abuse services. And so we are getting calls, but it's not unmanageable. We are able to assist. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much. Mr. de Graaf, would you be able to answer briefly, please? My apologies.
Yes, I'll be to the point. I must say that even before COVID-19, there is a service level agreement between us and the Provincial Department of Social Development, where we work together on the social relief of distress, having received previously also names from the Department of Social Development, and we proceed from our side. With COVID-19, we just strengthened that relationship because right down to the district level, the senior managers actually work together to compare the list to check on SOCPEN as to what is happening. I would also like to make my cell phone number as well as my email address available should there be any problems. Then the members are welcome to contact me. I must say that there's a very good relationship existing between Mr. Ewe and Dr. McDonald, and thanks to Dr. McDonald, who brought me in on the humanitarian group where the heads of are sitting, and Sassa also forms part of the ProfChop. Just in terms of the questions, we did put on the slide the unit cost for the food parcels, 1,200. The actual value of the food parcel is 880 Rand, and the rest of the money will be then for the other related costs coming from the service providers. But as indicated, the unit cost 1,200. Despite the fact that our offices are closed, we have various channels, as I indicated, the call center, the WhatsApp group. I'm always available. Whoever would call me or send me a WhatsApp, I will respond to that, as well as our officials. I can also say that as far as possible, we have one entry point for the list to come through, and that's the Acting General Manager for Grants Administration, Ms. Lintompa. And Madam Chair, if the members want it, I can also make that available. On the issue that the Honourable Member Bosman raised on the medical assessment in the Eden Karoo, yes, we have a major problem there. We already spoke to the Department of Health in the Eden Karoo area to help us with the assessments, but due to the scarcity of doctors, they're not able to assist us actually in that regard. We then went on an open tender to ask for doctors in that area. We got no response. Now we have asked Treasury to allow us to do direct sourcing, where we can go to doctors and ask them to help us. Otherwise, we will sit with a major crisis within that particular area. And if the members can help us in that liaison with the Department of Health, we would really welcome it. It's not only for the Eden Karoo. We started experiencing that problem in the Boland Overberg also. We already spoke on, and Dr. McDonald, on the relationship between us and them. Just on the Honourable Member Syed spoke about moving to the vouchers and the cash payment. I can report to the members that Sassa is working in a big way on that one. Within the next week or the week after that, we will make an announcement as to doing away with the food parcels and then paying the rest of the persons that requested the food parcels either through cash or through the voucher system. And our national minister already started speaking as to how we're going to do that. But I think more details will be made available to the public in next week as to how they can go about, especially with the special payment of the 350 Rand, as well as the vouchers and the cash when we would actually replace the food parcels. In terms of the yes, we are slow in terms of working through those particular lists, but our head office has asked us now to submit all our lists, our master lists actually, to them, so that they can actually then put it onto the system with the intention of moving towards the cash and the voucher system. So although we have 30,000 names at this particular stage, if we implement the voucher and the cash system, those persons can also then be paid immediately. On the member asked the question in terms of what do I mean with the province. Dr. McDonald will also know that the food parcels made available by the National Department of Social Development through the Solidarity Fund with I think it's about 14,800 food parcels that will be made available to the Department of Social Development. And also in terms of the additional funds, the disaster fund, the province had access to that to the funds, and not to the and not Sassa. Let me just check on the question, just Madam Chair, of the issue that the Honourable Member Marais raised. Although the grant beneficiary will be excluded, nothing prevents a member from within that household who's unemployed and also applying then for the food parcel. On the issue of the list received from councillors, we take the approach that the councillors are the representatives also of those communities, and those councillors they have the right then, as well as the community leaders, to submit that the list then to us. The responsibility of Sassa is to phone those beneficiaries, to verify the information that has been provided to us, and that is the process that we have undertaken to make it fair and square for everybody who would actually request that with the food parcel. And we have, Madam Chair, we have received the list from everybody, community, from the political parties. We accept it and we work through them, and we try to see that there's an equal distribution to all the communities. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. de Graaff. I know that the Minister Fernandez needed to leave at 5:30. I'm not sure if she's still on the line. And if so, if there's some final remarks. If not, I'll just say thank you very much to her.
Thank you, Chair. I am still here. I rescheduled my next meeting till 6 o'clock. Just quickly, the two issues. The one was around politicization, and I must say, I must reflect on Minister de Graaff's closing statement, because there is room for manipulation in the system, and we have seen this spread all over the news, and it's not becoming, as the Honourable Marais said, it is about dignity of an individual. And I feel strongly about all these pictures that are posted with people standing and doing their donations. But be that as it may, we don't live in a perfect world. The City of Cape Town did parcel distribution, Sassa does parcel distribution, DSD does, and then there are many others in between. However, in our department, when we launched on the safety net project that we called it, it was made very clear to the senior management team and everyone involved in the food chain, as if it were, that we would not entertain politics at any level. So the only way information can come through is through the municipal manager. We did not work off lists, because suddenly there were lists with 6,000 names on and 2,000 names. And I said, no, it does not work. Bearing in mind that this exercise of ours had specific criteria. So it wasn't, and sadly, we have moved with the extended lockdown. The hunger challenge has become even bigger. So we have moved now from a safety net to where we are sitting as a humanitarian work stream with stakeholders, internal, external. And I also need to alert the members that we do have a bereavement work stream, because admittedly and sadly, people will die and there will be a need for support and counseling. And Minister Meyer, that work stream was led by Minister Andre Marais, and Minister Meyer leads the work stream with the religious fraternity, so that they too can be part of the process. So my last point, the situation with the homeless is not ideal. There has been a lot of noise. However, it was a national direction. And I need to pause here and tell the members there are two things that are tripping up our need to get food to the vulnerable. It is the interpretation of the directions. The minute the hot cooked food came, we got endless reports from our NPOs telling us that SAPS had closed them down for feeding children. And that was disturbing. And then just yesterday and the day before, some of our very big, well-known NGOs that do good work, they were pulled off and told that they need another type of permit. So right now, there's a lot of gray. There are legal opinions being sought. But at the end of the day, I would like to say thank you to each and every South African who has stepped up, the individuals who have made food parcels, the NGOs, the NPOs, the community-based organizations, religious fraternity, and even now with the municipalities coming on stream, our 5 district municipalities will be rolling, and there is a protocol document for the councillors to work that will prevent them from getting involved in the actual handling of food parcels and distribution. I do understand that there are many councillors who fork money out of their own pockets, and we commend them for that, but it has been a very challenging time for us to try and manage, yet we don't want to deter anyone from lending a hand, because that one extra meal could save someone's life. Thank you, Chairperson. We appreciate the opportunity, and we will take the questions for written response and ensure that we provide them to the committee at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I'd like to thank both the Department of Social Development as well as Sassa Western Cape for the work that you're doing under very difficult circumstances. This thing came without warning, and you have both very difficult jobs to help the most vulnerable in society. So we wish you well in your endeavours to do what you can and to really assist those that need it the most. Thank you very much. I'm going to excuse the departments now.
Thank you, Madam
Members,
Chair.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Members, we unfortunately have run out of time some time ago, and I know many members already are late for other meetings. So I'm going to ask then that our next meeting on Wednesday starts half an hour earlier at 1:30, so that we can deal with our committee admin, including the minutes, as well as the resolutions and actions from Wednesday's meeting on the situational analysis, as well as today's resolutions and actions on food security. We have received those questions from members that wanted to ask them on email to the Premier and the Health Department. Thank you very much for that. If you could do the same thing for this meeting, if you could send your questions and or resolutions via email to the procedural officers by latest Tuesday noon, then we will deal with those together at the start of the meeting next week, Wednesday. The program has been distributed on email. Mr. Matthews has placed it on the screen, so you can have a look at our next 2 meetings. The 29th of April, which will start at 1:30. We will start with admin, and then we will have the presentations from the police, as well as the Department of Community Safety and the oversight bodies. And then the following day, because we agreed, given that Friday is a public holiday next week, we will meet on Thursday instead of the usual Friday, where we will be dealing with protection of the vulnerable, again with departments of social development, UIF, Sassa and the Provincial Commissioner to deal with the issues, most of which I've tried to capture in the additional comments, which all came from the members' inputs. And I'd like to thank members. You've really put a lot of thought into the submissions that you made to the committee. And as you can see, we're putting together a program that is really holistic and looks at all the various issues within each theme. And I want to say thank you very much. I see that there is a point of order, but we'll have to keep this brief. I'll have to close the meeting within the next minute or so. Honourable Doug Moore.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you also for your summary, and to all the members for, as you said, the very thought-through presentations. Could we just agree that the discussion that we wanted to have about how we should treat the meeting chat is an item that we discuss when we convene again, firstly, And I have also asked you, Chair, I did email you about whether the letter that I had sent to the Premier with the motivation for the Provincial Food Command is also a subject for discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. On the second point, you did email the committee with a submission. If we can deal with that then at the start of the next meeting as one of our admin items in the first 30 minutes, would that be acceptable?
Thank you very much.
Okay, and then on your first point, on the chat, I had asked that we please discuss this issue on the chat at the end of the meeting, but in spite of that, you pushed ahead and raised it anyway. I ruled that the chat is only for points of order. Unfortunately, both you and Honourable Nkondlo did not abide by the ruling and continued to use the chat function in disregard of the request. And in fact, were crude about it. So I don't want to reopen it. I have already ruled. The chat function is for points of orders only, because it's akin to having a full-blown conversation during a committee meeting. It's very distracting for everyone else. You know, I cannot monitor 57 messages from you and Honourable Nkondlo that just keep coming all the time, and it's distracting, and one is not able to listen to the presentation and to be able to engage with the content. So there is a WhatsApp group for the COVID ad hoc committee, which is available, and also I would request that we stick to our usual process that we've done before, that any questions that were not answered or you are not able to ask, that you put those in email in writing, and then those are sent to the departments as follow-ups for responses in writing. Okay, thank you very much, members. I think we had a very good meeting today, and I want to thank you very much for your constructive inputs as well as your cooperation. The meeting is now adjourned. We will see you next week, Wednesday at 1:30.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.